You rise in complete darkness, long before dawn touches the Roman fort that sits on a gentle hill above a quiet river valley. The darkness is total and patient, filling your small sleeping chamber like still water, and for a moment you simply sit on the edge of your low wooden bed, with your eyes open to nothing at all. The air around you is cool and motionless, carrying a faint blend of scents that never change, the dusty sweetness of the wool blanket you've just pushed aside, the dry mineral smell of the clay walls, and a trace of wood smoke that has seeped in from the bakery chimney next door. You let your bare feet rest on the packed earthen floor, feeling its familiar cool smoothness under your soles, a surface worn to a gentle polish by years of quiet footsteps in the dark. There is no hurry anywhere in your body, no sense of alarm, only the steady weight of a routine so old that it has become a part of your bones. You reach for your tunic, a simple garment of undyed linen that hangs on a wooden peg beside the bed, and pull it over your head with slow, practiced movements, letting the soft cloth settle around your shoulders and fall past your knees. The linen smells of sunshine and the mild herbal rinse you use for washing, and it holds a slight coolness from the night air. Next you find your leather sandals beside the bed, their straps already loosened from the previous morning, and you slip your feet into them one at a time, bending to fasten the ties with a calm, blind precision that needs no light. The leather is warm from the room and molded to the shape of your feet, and the quiet scuff of the soles on the floor is the first sound you make in the new day. You stand up and cross the tiny chamber in 3 slow steps, your hand outstretched until your palm meets the rough surface of the wooden door. The wood is old and slightly warped, and you push it open with a gentle pressure that produces a soft, low creak, a sound so familiar that you no longer notice it unless you deliberately listen. Beyond the door lies a narrow corridor that runs the length of your quarters and connects to the main cookhouse of the legionary barracks. The corridor is darker still than your room, if such a thing is possible, because it has no window at all, and relies on the faintest seep of air from the courtyard at its far end. You walk along it slowly, your left hand brushing the wall to guide you, feeling the cool clay plaster and the occasional rough patch where a repair was made long ago. The floor here is of packed gravel and crushed pottery sherds, a surface that crunches softly under your sandals in a way that feels like a secret whispered only to the night. On your right, you pass the small kitchen garden that you tend in the afternoons, a narrow strip of soil bordered by embedded amphora necks. Though you cannot see the plants in this darkness, you know exactly where each one stands. The rosemary bush that brushes your elbow with its brittle, fragrant twigs, the low thyme that releases a faint, earthy perfume as you pass, the marjoram and the small bay tree whose leaves you sometimes add to the oven for a sweet smoke. The leaves are merely darker shapes against the general blackness, and you acknowledge them with a slight turn of your head, a wordless greeting to the growing things that share your days. The air in the corridor shifts as you move, growing slightly warmer and carrying the first hints of the bakery's permanent aroma, a deep, baked-in scent of old flour and oak ash, and the gentle tang of fermenting dough. At the end of the corridor, you come to a second door, this one broader and heavier, made of oak planks fitted with an iron latch. You lift the latch with a metallic click that echoes briefly in the small space, and you push the door inward, stepping into the bakery itself. The room is larger than your sleeping chamber, large enough to hold the great wood bench, the mixing trough, the oven, and the sacks of flour, yet it still feels intimate and enclosed, like a wooden ship's cabin adrift in the night. As always, you pause just inside the threshold to let the space welcome you. The floor underfoot is now flagstone, slightly uneven and cool, even through your sandals, and you feel the faint vibration of the fort's deep silence settle around you. To your right stands the domed brick oven, a massive, rounded shape that you sense more than see, and you know from its faint radiating warmth that the embers you banked the night before are still glowing softly beneath a blanket of ash. The air carries the specific, dusty scent of yesterday's baking, mixed with the clean smell of the scrubbed wooden surfaces and the quiet, living perfume of the sourdough starter that waits in its clay pot on the workbench. Everything is in its place, just as you left it, and this certainty is a small repeated gift that you accept without ceremony. You move forward to the low shelf beside the door, where your oil lamp sits next to a small jar of olive oil and the clay bowl holding spare wicks. Your fingers find the lamp first, a simple terracotta vessel with a pinch spout and a handle shaped like a rounded ear, and you lift it carefully, feeling its weight and the slosh of oil inside. You set it on the workbench, then return for the oil jar and the fire striker that rests in a niche in the wall. The striker is a curved piece of iron with a flint held in a small leather pouch, and you arrange these items on the bench with the unhurried precision of someone who has performed this small ritual thousands of times. You unscrew the wooden stopper from the oil jar and pour a thin stream of pale golden oil into the lamp, filling it to just below the rim, and the liquid catches the faintest hint of a glow from somewhere, perhaps the oven's residual warmth reflecting off the walls. Then you take a new wick from the bowl, a twisted strand of linen fiber, and thread it through the spout until the wet end sits in the oil and the dry tip protrudes just enough to catch a flame. You wipe your fingers on a cloth that hangs permanently from a hook on the bench's edge, a cloth already soft with flour and oil from many days. Next you pick up the flint and striker, holding the flint above the lamp's spout with one hand and striking downward with the iron in a short, sharp motion. A tiny spark jumps from the flint, a brief orange star in the blackness, and on the second strike it lands squarely on the wick, which catches with a soft, almost wet hiss. A flame grows from that single point, small and wavering at first, casting a thin circle of amber light that pushes the darkness back just enough to reveal your immediate surroundings. You replace the striker and flint in their niche and cup your hand around the lamp's flame for a moment, protecting it as it steadies into a calm, upright tongue of light. Now the bakery begins to emerge piece by piece, as if the lamp were painting the room into existence. Directly before you stands the great wooden mixing trough, a rectangular vessel carved from a single massive oak trunk, its surface darkened and polished by decades of flour and water and the constant working of dough. It rests on sturdy trestles, and its rim comes up to your waist, a height perfect for the long kneading that will come later. Beside the trough, the workbench stretches almost the entire length of the wall, a thick slab of beechwood planed smooth and supported by heavy legs. On the bench, arranged in a neat row, are your tools for the day, the bronze dough scraper with its curved edge, the wooden modius measure, a flat leveling stick, a small balance scale with 2 brass pans, and the clay pot that holds the sourdough starter. The lamplight catches the dull gleam of the bronze and the soft matte surface of the clay, and shadows pool in the corners of the room where the flour sacks are stacked. You turn toward the oven and see its rounded brick dome looming in the corner like a sleeping animal. The iron door closed, but radiating a gentle, comforting heat that you can feel even from a few paces away. The bricks are dark with age and soot, and the stone base beneath is cool to the touch. Above the oven, a small ventilation hole pierces the wall, and through it you can just sense the quality of the outside air, still deeply dark and silent, but carrying the distant promise of a coming dawn. You walk to the workbench and stand before the clay pot that holds your sourdough starter. The pot is a simple, unglazed vessel with a flared rim and a cloth cover tied with a loop of string. Its sides are slightly warm from the latent heat of the oven, a warmth that encourages the yeast and bacteria living within. You untie the string and lift the cloth, folding it back with care, and immediately the fragrance of the starter rises to meet you. It is a complex, pleasant tang, reminiscent of ripe apples just beginning to soften, mixed with the clean acidity of yogurt and the deep, earthy sweetness of freshly milled grain. The scent fills your nostrils and seems to settle somewhere in the back of your throat, and you breathe it in with quiet appreciation, as if greeting an old friend. Inside the pot, the starter is a pale beige pool, glossy and alive, its surface dotted with tiny bubbles that break and reform with a slow, silent rhythm. A network of fine cracks is formed around the edges where the mixture has risen and fallen during the night, leaving a delicate, lacy residue on the inner walls of the pot. You tilt the pot gently toward the lamp, watching the thick liquid move, and you see the telltale strands of gluten that indicate a healthy, vigorous culture. This starter has been alive for longer than you can remember, passed down from the baker who worked this oven before you, fed each day with the same flour and water that the fort supplies. It is a simple, enduring partnership between human and microbe, and you tend it with the same unthinking devotion you give to your own breathing. Satisfied that the starter is active and well, you set the pot back on the bench and turn to the large terracotta water vessel that stands in the corner near the door. This jar is as tall as your hip and holds enough water for a full day's baking, filled the previous afternoon from the courtyard fountain. You lift the wooden lid and dip a small bronze jug into the cool water, hearing the hollow glug of the jug filling. The water is clear and faintly sweet, drawn from a deep well and carried through lead pipes, and it holds a slight chill from resting in the stone jar overnight. You pour a measured amount into a smaller clay bowl that you use solely for feeding the starter, estimating the quantity with an eye trained by years of practice. Then you go to the flour sacks stacked against the far wall. The sacks are woven from coarse hemp, each stamped with the mark of the imperial grain supply and the name of the mill where the grain was ground. You loosen the tie on the nearest sack, the one containing stone-ground wholemeal spelt, and the flour inside reveals itself as a soft, powdery mound, the color of pale sand. You take the bronze scoop from the bench and sink it into the flour, feeling the gentle resistance of the packed grain, and you lift it out level and full. The scoop makes a quiet, sandy sound as it slides through the flour, and a fine dust puffs up momentarily, catching the lamplight and settling on your forearm like a whisper. You carry the scoop to the bench and tip the flour into the starter pot, letting it slide in a smooth cascade. You repeat this twice more, adding flour 1 scoop at a time, and the starter welcomes the addition by dimpling on the surface and then smoothing over as the dry flour absorbs the moisture. Now you pour the reserved water from the clay bowl into the pot, adding it in a thin stream while you stir with a long wooden spatula. The spatula is worn smooth from endless use, its tip rounded and dark with age. As you stir, the mixture changes consistency, the stiff starter and the dry flour and the cool water merging into a uniform, thick batter the color of creamy oatmeal. The sound of the spatula against the clay is a soft, rhythmic scrape that marks time like a slow metronome, and you stir until no pockets of dry flour remain, and the entire mixture is glossy and smooth. You scrape the spatula clean on the rim of the pot, tap it twice to knock off any clinging batter, and then wipe it with the cloth. The pot's sides are now coated with a fresh layer of starter that will dry and flake in intricate patterns by tomorrow, and the surface of the starter is level and still, dotted with a few small bubbles that hint at the invisible work beginning deep inside. You cover the pot again with the cloth, tucking the edges under the string, and you pat the top gently, a small gesture of encouragement that has no practical purpose but feels right. The feeding is complete, and the starter will now rest and grow stronger as the morning unfolds, ready to leaven the day's bread. You step back from the bench and take a slow breath, filling your lungs with the bakery's layered scent, which now includes the fresh, grainy note of the newly stirred starter and the sharper aroma of the lamp oil burning cleanly. Your hands are dusted with a fine coating of flour, and you clap them together over the trough, watching the white puff drift down into the dark wooden interior. The tiny particles float and sparkle in the lamplight before settling out of sight. You walk to the oven and place your palm flat against the iron door, feeling the steady muted warmth that tells you the embers are still alive and the brick mass will not need a full rekindling from cold. The warmth seeps into your hand and travels up your arm, a comforting sensation that anchors you in the present moment. You stand there for a long, idle minute, your gaze resting on nothing in particular, your mind as calm and empty as the pre-dawn sky. There is no rush, no impending deadline beyond the natural rhythm of the dough and the fire, just the slow tick of time moving through the silent bakery. Outside, the fort remains wrapped in sleep. The sentries on the walls pace their slow circuits, their footsteps a muffled, regular cadence that you can hear if you strain your ears, a sound so constant that it becomes a kind of silence itself. A night bird calls once from the direction of the granary, a single clear note that fades as quickly as it came. The river in the valley below is too distant to hear, but you know it is there, flowing steadily over smooth stones, just as it has for centuries. Inside the bakery, your small lamp continues to burn with a steady, unwavering flame, casting your shadow long and soft against the wall. The sourdough starter, newly fed, begins its slow alchemical work, the yeast cells waking fully and starting to consume the fresh flour, generating tiny bubbles of carbon dioxide that will later lift the dense dough into airy bread. The day ahead holds the kneading, the firing of the oven, the shaping of 200 loaves, and the delivery to the mess hall. But all of that is still far in the future, mere possibilities hovering at the edge of awareness. For now, there is only this quiet moment between waking and the full beginning of work, a space of pure waiting that you inhabit without resistance. You decide to sit for a while on the low stool that you keep beside the oven. The stool is a simple three-legged piece of beechwood, its seat worn into a gentle dip that matches the shape of your body. You pull it out slightly and settle onto it, folding your hands in your lap and letting your weight sink fully into the wood. Your sandals rest flat on the flagstone floor, and you can feel the faint vibration of the earth through the stone, a deep, almost imaginary hum that might be the fort's sleeping breath or might be nothing at all. Your eyes travel slowly around the room, tracing the familiar outlines of the bench, the sacks, the water jar, the rafters overhead where a few cobwebs hang motionless. A small gecko clings to the wall near the ceiling, its pale body motionless in the lamplight, waiting for the morning warmth to stir the insects. You watch it without expectation, the way one watches a cloud or a leaf floating on water. Your thoughts, if they can be called thoughts, are as simple and transparent as glass. Flour, water, fire, salt, the smell of baking bread, the sound of the mule cart arriving at mid-morning. These fragments drift through your mind in a gentle, unhurried parade, none demanding attention, none lingering longer than a few heartbeats. The lamp burns on, its oil level dropping at a rate so slow as to be imperceptible. Outside the narrow window high on the wall, the quality of the darkness begins to shift. It is not yet light, not even the faintest grey, but the absolute blackness of deep night thins by a fraction, as if a door had opened somewhere very far away. The change is so subtle that you feel it more than see it, a softening of the air that tells your body dawn is still an hour away, but moving closer. The rooster in the fort's small poultry yard senses this too, and he stirs on his perch, making a low, guttering sound in his throat that is not yet a crow, but a rehearsal for one. A dog barks once near the stables, a single resonant note that travels across the courtyard and fades. You hear these sounds with a detached clarity that comes from being fully awake while the world around you still dreams, and you register them as you would the turning of a page in a book you have read many times. Eventually you rise from the stool with the same slow, deliberate motion that began your day. The muscles in your back and shoulders are warm and loose, and your feet are sure on the flagstones. You walk to the water jar and pour a small amount of water into a beaker, just enough to wet your throat. The water is cool and clean, and you drink it slowly, feeling it trace a cold line down your chest. And you turn to the flour sacks and count them with your eyes, 4 of spelt, 2 of barley, 1 of fine white flour reserved for the officer's bread. The numbers align with your mental tally, and you make a small mark on the wooden tally board that hangs near the sacks, using a piece of chalk kept in a hollow knot in the wood. The mark is a simple cross, signifying that the starter has been fed and the day's work has officially begun. Outside, the sky continues its slow, patient transformation, and you know that soon you will begin sifting the flour for the first batch of dough, but not yet. For a few more minutes, the bakery belongs only to the lamp, the starter, the sleeping oven, and you, standing quietly in the center of the room, perfectly still, perfectly content, waiting for the light. The starter fed and resting under its cloth, you now turn your full attention to the main work of the morning, the measuring and mixing of the flour that will become the day's bread. The bakery around you is still lit only by the single oil lamp, its flame now tall and steady, and the shadows it casts are deep and soft-edged against the walls. You walk toward the back of the room, where the flour sacks stand in a neat row against the cool stone wall, each one a bulky, rounded shape that reaches your waist. There are 6 sacks in total this morning, 4 of wholemeal spelt, 2 of barley flour, and a smaller sack of fine white wheat flour that you reserve for the officer's mess. Each sack is woven from coarse hemp fibre, rough under your palm, and stamped across its belly with the black ink mark of the Imperial Supply Depot at the nearest river port, along with the name of the mill where the grain was ground. The stamp shows a wheat ear and a legionary eagle, simple and official, and the ink has bled slightly into the fibers from the long journey by mule cart along the stone-paved road. You run your fingers over the stamp as you pass, a habitual touch, and the woven texture feels dry and slightly warm, full of the stored summer heat that never quite leaves the grain. You select the first sack of spelt flour and work open the knotted drawstring at its neck, loosening the cord with a series of small tugs that release a puff of pale dust into the lamplight. The flour inside is a soft, powdery mound, the color of light sand, speckled with the fine bran flecks that give the legionary bread its nutty flavor and dense crumb. You sink both hands into the sack for a moment, letting the flour sift through your fingers, feeling its silky, cool dryness, and the sensation is as familiar as water. Then you lift the sack by its bottom corners and tip a portion of its contents into a large, shallow wooden bin that sits beside the mixing trough. The flour slides out in a gentle, sighing rush, and a fine cloud rises up and hangs in the lamplight like a tiny weather system, swirling slowly before settling on the bench, the floor, and your forearms. You pause to let the dust subside, breathing through your nose in slow, even measures, and the air carries the clean, stony scent of freshly milled grain, a smell that is almost sweet, but not quite, more like crushed limestone and dried field grass. Next you bring out the large bronze sieve that hangs from a hook on the wall, a broad circular frame fitted with a mesh of fine copper wire. The sieve is heavy but balanced, its wooden handle worn to a smooth dark polish from years of use. You set it over the open mouth of the mixing trough, resting it on two wooden support rails that keep it steady, and you begin to transfer the flour from the holding bin into the sieve, using the bronze scoop. The scoop slides into the flour with a quiet shushing sound and comes up heaped and full, and you tip it gently into the sieve, letting the flour fall in a thin, even cascade. Then you take the sieve handles in both hands and begin to shake it in a patient circular motion, your wrists making small rhythmic rotations. The flour dances inside the mesh, the fine particles sifting through the tiny openings and falling into the trough below in a continuous, silent rain, while the larger bits of bran and the occasional hard speck of husk remain trapped on top. The motion is gentle and unvarying, a soft oscillation that sets the sieve humming lightly, and you find your breathing slipping into time with the movement. After each scoopful, you stop to tap the side of the sieve with the heel of your hand, dislodging the trapped bran into a small clay bowl set aside for the purpose, and then you resume the sifting. The bowl slowly fills with a coarse, flaky residue that you will later scatter for the chickens in the poultry yard. The work is utterly absorbing in its simplicity, each repetition a small, complete world, and the fine dust continues to rise and settle, coating your arms and the front of your tunic with a soft, velvety whiteness. When the first sack of spelt has been sifted through, you pause to wipe your forehead with the back of your wrist, leaving a white smear on your skin, and then you move to the barley sacks. Barley flour is heavier and darker than spelt, a pale grey beige that smells more sharply earthy, like dried mushrooms and clean straw. You sift it in the same steady rhythm, watching it fall through the mesh and mingle with the lighter spelt in the trough below, creating a soft marbling of two colors that will soon disappear when you mix. The blending of the two grains is standard for the common marching loaves, because the barley adds a hearty filling quality that sustains a soldier on long patrols, while the spelt gives the dough enough elasticity to rise well. You have known this ratio since your first day as a baker's apprentice. 2 parts spelt to 1 part barley, a proportion fixed by the quartermaster's standing orders. You do not need to think about it any more than you need to think about the act of walking, and your hands move through the measuring with the quiet assurance of deep habit. Once the flours are sifted and combined in the trough, you pause to take stock. The trough is now about a quarter full, with a pale, soft mound, and its surface is smooth and slightly peaked, like a miniature mountain range under the lamp's glow. You brush your palms together, and the flour that was clinging to your skin falls away in a tiny, silent cascade. Now you turn to the tools of measurement that rest on the bench. The wooden modius bucket, a cylindrical vessel with straight sides and a capacity of exactly 1 Roman modius, roughly 8.7 liters, according to the engraved mark on its base. Alongside it lies the flat leveling stick, a simple strip of beech wood with squared edges, and a smaller half modius measure for finer adjustments. You lift the modius bucket and check its interior for any old caked flour or moisture, finding it perfectly clean and dry, and then you set it on the bench beside the trough. The recipe for the day's bread runs in your mind like a quiet chant. For every 80 standard loaves, you need 1 modius of the mixed flour, a portion of starter the size of a man's fist, a palmful of salt, and enough water to bring the dough together into a stiff, cohesive mass. Today, because a detachment of auxiliaries has arrived at the fort for joint training exercises, the morning orders call for 200 loaves instead of the usual 160. The wooden tally board near the door bears a chalk mark confirming the number, scrawled there last evening by the kitchen overseer. 200 loaves means you will need 2.5 modii of flour, slightly more starter, and an extra pinch of salt. The arithmetic is simple, and you work it out without words, visualizing the dough in its finished quantity, the number of baking rounds required, the time it will take to shape and load the oven. Your mind holds all these numbers gently, without strain, as a shepherd holds the count of a flock. You dip the modius bucket into the trough, pressing its rim down into the flour, and scooping upward so that the vessel fills and overflows slightly. Then you lift it out, cradling its weight against your chest, and you carry it to the bench where the leveling stick waits. Setting the bucket down, you take the stick in your right hand and draw it across the top of the bucket in a single smooth stroke, scraping away the excess flour so that the surface is perfectly level with the rim. The excess falls back into the trough with a soft, papery sound, and you tip the measured modius of flour into the center of the trough, piling it in a clean, cone-shaped mound. You repeat the process, filling the bucket, leveling it, and adding the flour to the mound, counting under your breath in a low murmur, 1, 2, and then the half modius measure for the final half. The counting is not strictly necessary, because you can see the quantity, but the numbers create a steady, reassuring framework, like the ticking of a water clock. The work is a quiet meditation in weights and measures, each scoop bringing a dusty certainty, each leveling stroke an act of precision that pleases some deep part of you. The flour mound grows, and you pat it gently into shape with your palms, creating a broad, flat-topped hill with a crater in its center, ready to receive the other ingredients. You now walk to the clay salt crock that sits on a low shelf near the oven, protected from moisture by a fitted wooden lid. Salt is a precious commodity in the fort, delivered in hard grey-white blocks from the evaporation ponds near the sea, and then crushed with a mortar and pestle into coarse granules. You remove the lid and take a small pinch of salt between your thumb and forefinger, feeling the sharp crystalline grains that glint in the lamplight. The salt smells faintly of the sea, a briny ghost of its distant origin, and you sprinkle it evenly over the flour mound, the crystal scattering and disappearing into the pale surface. For 200 loaves, you add a second pinch and then a third for good measure, because the auxiliaries will be working hard under the summer sun and will need the salt for their bodies. You nod once, a small private confirmation, and replace the lid on the crock. Now comes the starter, the living heart of the bread. You lift the cloth from the clay pot and peer inside. The starter has already responded to its feeding, the surface gently domed and pitted with 100 tiny bubbles that break and reform in slow motion. Its color has lightened slightly, and its aroma has deepened into a fruity, yogurt-like pungency that fills the air around the bench. You take a wooden spoon and scoop out a generous portion, roughly the size of a large apple, and you deposit it directly into the hollow crater at the top of the flour mound. The starter settles there, a glossy, creamy pool that trembles slightly from the motion, and you watch as a small bubble on its surface stretches and pops with a silent blink. You return the remainder of the starter to its pot and cover it again, knowing it will continue to develop and be ready for the next day's batch, a cycle that never ends. The water comes last. You lift the bronze jug and carry it to the large terracotta storage jar in the corner, where you refill it with cool water that has been resting overnight. The water splashes softly, a clean, bright sound in the quiet room, and the jug becomes heavier in your hand. You carry it back to the trough and stand for a moment, looking at the arrangement of flour, salt, and starter, the raw materials of sustenance laid out in simple order. Then you begin to pour the water in a thin, steady stream into the crater, watching it fill the hollow and begin to seep into the surrounding flour walls. The starter disperses into the water, turning it a milky beige, and the salt dissolves invisibly. You pour until the water level reaches roughly the consistency of thick mud, and then you stop, setting the jug aside. The time for measuring is over. The time for mixing has begun. You lean forward and plunge both hands into the trough, fingers first, sinking into the cool, sticky mixture at the center. The sensation is immediate and enveloping. The cool water, the gritty flour, the slick, elastic starter all combine into a heavy, clinging mass that wraps around your fingers and climbs halfway up your forearms. You begin to work your hands in a slow, circular motion, drawing the dry flour from the outer edges of the crater into the wet center. The dough forms gradually, shifting from a shaggy, clumpy porridge into a coherent mass that sticks to itself more than to your skin. You cup your hands and lift the mass, turning it over, pressing it down with the heels of your palms, and then repeating the motion. It is a slow, patient dance, your body rocking forward and back, your breathing deep and steady. The only sounds are the wet, squelching noise of the dough folding, the faint creak of the wooden trough, and the distant muffled tread of the sentry on the wall outside. The dough resists at first, shaggy and reluctant, tearing when you pull it. But as you continue to work it, the gluten strands begin to align and strengthen. You feel the change under your hands as a gradual smoothing, a transition from rough and sticky to elastic and cohesive. The mass begins to clean the sides of the trough, gathering up the stray bits of flour and the small pockets of dry grain, until everything is incorporated into a single, continuous whole. You pause occasionally to scrape your palms with the edge of the dough scraper, removing the thickest layer of cling, and then you return your hands to the dough, resuming the steady folding and pressing. The work is mildly strenuous, a warmth building in your shoulders and across your upper back, but it is a pleasant, grounding effort, the kind that settles the mind into a quiet, focused state. After perhaps 10 minutes of this initial mixing, the dough has come together into a rough, heavy ball that holds its shape when you pat it. It is still far from smooth, its surface dimpled and uneven, and it smells strongly of raw flour and the tang of the starter. You cover it with a damp linen cloth, tucking the edges around the dough so that it will not dry out, and you step back from the trough to let it rest. This first rest, the autolysis that the old bakers taught you without knowing the word, allows the flour to fully absorb the water and the gluten to begin its quiet knitting together. You wipe your hands on the cloth that hangs from the bench, then pour a little water from the jug into the clay cup and drink it slowly, feeling the coolness slide down your throat. The lamp continues to burn, its flame now a little shorter, and you lift the oil jar to add a thin stream of oil to the reservoir, replenishing what has been consumed. Outside, the sky has continued its slow, imperceptible lightening, and the narrow window now shows the faintest suggestion of deep blue, as if the blackness were thinning from the bottom up. A second rooster crows, this time a full-throated call that rings across the courtyard and fades, and you know that the camp will soon begin to stir. When the dough has rested long enough, you remove the cloth and lean into the trough again. The dough has relaxed considerably, its surface now softer and more pliant, and when you press a finger into it, the indentation fills slowly back. You begin the main kneading now, a longer, more rhythmic process that will develop the dough into a smooth, elastic mass capable of holding the gases produced by the yeast. You fold the dough in half toward you, then push it away with the heels of your hands, stretching it against the wooden surface, then fold it again, turn it a quarter turn, and repeat. The motion is steady and hypnotic. Fold, push, turn, fold, push, turn. Your body settles into a gentle rock, and your mind, with nothing to calculate or measure, drifts into a calm, open state. The dough slowly transforms under your hands, its surface becoming smoother with each pass, the dimples and tears disappearing as the gluten network tightens and aligns. You can feel the change as a subtle increase in resistance, a springiness that was not there before, and the dough begins to feel alive and cohesive, like a single unified thing with its own gentle agency. You knead for a long time, your entire world reduced to the wooden trough, the pale dough, and the rhythm of your own motion. The lamp burns lower still, but you do not notice. The room is now filled with a faint grey pre-dawn light that seeps through the high window and mixes with the amber glow. The dough is nearly ready, smooth and supple, its surface showing a fine, tight skin that dimples when you poke it and then slowly rebounds. You gather it into a neat ball, tucking the edges under in a final tidying motion, and then you wipe the surface with a damp cloth to prevent a crust from forming. You cover the trough with a fresh linen cloth, stretched taut and tucked under the rim, and you step back to survey your work. The mound of dough sits in the center of the trough, pale and serene under its covering, containing within itself the potential for 200 loaves of bread that will feed the soldiers through the long day ahead. The starter you fed earlier, the flour you sifted and measured, the salt and the water, all have come together into this single resting mass, and now it needs only time and warmth to rise. You breathe out a long, slow breath, feeling the pleasant ache in your arms and the satisfaction of a task completed without hurry, and you turn toward the oven, knowing that the next work will be to bring the fire to life. The dough rests under the damp linen cloth, and you rest with it, standing quietly beside the trough, while the first pale indications of dawn begin to seep through the high window. The cloth covering the dough is thin and loosely woven, and you can see the faint outline of the mass beneath it, a gentle dome that has already begun to spread slightly as the gluten relaxes. You lift one corner of the cloth and peer inside, and the dough has the soft, yielding look of something half asleep, its surface dimpled and slightly tacky where the cloth has touched it. The color is a warm, creamy beige, and the smell that rises is yeasty and mild, with a faint sour note that promises good flavor. You press a finger lightly into the surface, and the indentation fills back slowly, as if the dough were a cushion made of thick, living silk. This is the moment when the dough is ready for the main kneading, the long, patient working that will transform it from a rough, shaggy lump into a smooth, elastic, breathing whole. You remove the cloth entirely and drape it over the edge of the trough, then lean forward and slide both hands under the dough, lifting it slightly and letting it fall back with a soft, heavy plop. It has gained some strength during the rest, holding its shape a little better, and when you pull a small piece away from the edge, it stretches into a thick, ragged strand before breaking, a sign that the gluten strands are beginning to align, but need much more development. You press the piece back into the main mass and begin the kneading, starting with a slow, deliberate fold. You grip the far edge of the dough with your fingertips, pull it toward you so that it folds over the top, and then you lean the heels of your hands into the center, pushing down and away, stretching the dough against the wooden base of the trough. The motion is smooth and continuous. Fold, push, turn the dough a quarter turn to the right, and then repeat, each cycle taking about the space of a long, slow breath. The dough is still cool from the overnight water and the cool air of the bakery, and it feels slightly clammy and heavy against your skin, but as you work, the friction of your hands and the warmth of the wooden trough begin to impart a gentle heat that slowly penetrates the mass. Your body settles into the rhythm without any conscious decision, your shoulders rocking forward and back, your weight shifting from one foot to the other, your breathing deepening into a steady, slow pattern. The world outside the bakery is just beginning to stir, and you can hear the first distinct sounds of the waking fort through the small ventilation hole near the ceiling. A rooster crows fully now, a long, rasping call that rises and falls, and then cuts off abruptly, and a few moments later another rooster answers from somewhere near the granary. The sentries on the wall continue their pacing, their hobnailed boots crunching on the gravel walkway in a regular, unhurried cadence, and you can almost feel the rhythm of their steps blending with the rhythm of your hands. The kneading becomes a form of quiet meditation, the motions repeating without variation, your mind gradually emptying of all thoughts except the immediate sensations in your palms and fingers. You feel the dough changing under your hands, slowly at first, then more noticeably. The rough, shaggy texture begins to smooth out. The tacky stickiness diminishes, and the mass becomes more cohesive, holding together as a single unified piece rather than a collection of wet lumps. The surface of the dough develops a slight sheen, and tiny bubbles of air occasionally break at the surface with a soft, wet click, a sign of the yeast beginning its work. As the sky outside continues to lighten, the quality of the light in the bakery shifts by slow degrees. At first, the high window showed only the deepest indigo, a color so dark it was barely distinguishable from black, but now the indigo has paled to a soft, smoky gray, and you can make out the faint outline of the window's wooden frame against the wall. The lamplight, which earlier seemed bright and necessary, now appears more yellow and contained, its circle of influence shrinking as the general illumination grows. You do not stop to extinguish the lamp because you will need it for a while yet, but you note the change in the same quiet way. You note the gradual warming of the dough under your hands. The air in the bakery, too, is changing. The oven's latent warmth still radiates gently from the brick dome, but now a cooler, fresher draft seeps in through the gaps around the door, carrying the clean, damp smell of the courtyard, where the night dew is just beginning to evaporate. The combination of oven warmth and morning cool creates a soft, pleasant circulation, and you feel it on your face as you lean into the kneading, a gentle caress that keeps you alert and calm. You pause in your work to assess the dough's progress, straightening your back and rolling your shoulders once, loosening the slight ache that has settled there. You pinch a small piece of dough between your thumb and forefinger and stretch it slowly upward, testing its elasticity. The dough stretches into a thin, translucent sheet before tearing, a window pane of pale beige that lets the light pass through, and this tells you that the gluten is well developed, the proteins having aligned into a strong, flexible network. The tear itself is a clean, circular hole, not a ragged split, and you nod once in quiet satisfaction. The dough still needs a little more working, but it is close, and you return the pinched piece to the main mass and resume the kneading with the same patient, unvarying rhythm. Outside, the fort continues to wake in small, incremental stages. A door opens somewhere in the barracks, its wooden hinges groaning, and a few voices murmur in the low, indistinct tones of men who have just risen from sleep and are not yet ready to speak loudly. The sound carries across the courtyard and into the bakery as a gentle, rolling murmur, like the sound of a distant stream, and then fades as the door closes again. A little later, you hear the first metallic clink of the blacksmith's hammer, a single, experimental tap on an anvil, followed by a pause, and then the regular, ringing rhythm of the smith beginning his morning work. The hammer falls in a steady beat, 1, 2, 1, 2, a percussive counterpoint to the soft, wet sounds of your kneading, and the two rhythms play against each other in a way that is strangely harmonious. You do not consciously listen to these sounds, but they enter your awareness and settle there, forming a gentle background that makes the silence of the bakery feel fuller and more complete. The dough under your hands has now become noticeably smoother and more elastic, its surface glossy and tight. When you press your palm into it, the dough resists with a gentle, springy pushback, and when you release the pressure, the indentation fills back almost immediately. The color has lightened slightly, taking on a creamy ivory tone, and the yeasty smell has deepened, mingling with the faint, nutty aroma of the spelt and the earthier scent of the barley. You decide that the dough is nearly finished, and you knead for a few more minutes, focusing on the final, tidying motions that will shape the mass into a neat, compact ball. You gather the dough together, tucking the edges underneath with a series of quick, practiced gestures, rotating the mass as you work until the top is stretched smooth and taut. The ball sits in the center of the trough, round and pale and serene, like a moon made of living flour, and you step back to look at it, wiping your hands on the cloth that hangs at your waist. The kneading is complete, and the dough is ready for its first long rise. You rinse your hands in a small basin of water that you keep on the bench for this purpose, the water cool and refreshing against your warmed skin, and then you dry them on a clean section of the cloth. You take a fresh linen cloth, this one dry and clean, and you drape it over the dough, tucking the edges loosely around the mass so that it is protected but not constricted. The cloth will keep the surface from drying out and forming a hard crust, and it will also trap a little of the yeast's warmth, encouraging a steady, even rise. You pat the top of the cloth gently, a small habitual gesture, and then you turn away from the trough, letting the dough rest in peace. Now you walk to the narrow window and stand for a moment, looking out at the courtyard that is slowly filling with the grey, even light of early morning. The window is small and set high in the wall, but by standing on a low wooden block that you keep there for the purpose, you can see a slice of the world outside. The courtyard stones are still dark with overnight damp, and the shadows are long and soft, stretching from the base of the granary and the stables toward the center of the open space. The sky above is a pale pearlescent grey, streaked with thin ribbons of cloud that catch the first hint of gold from the sun that is just beginning to rise beyond the eastern hills. A few sparrows flit from the eaves of the barracks to the watering trough, their wings making a soft whirring sound, and a grey cat slinks along the base of the wall, pausing to sniff at a crack between the stones. The sentry on the near watchtower changes position, his silhouette briefly visible against the lightening sky, and then he settles back into stillness. The whole scene is one of quiet, orderly awakening, a world stirring gently into its daily routine, and you watch it with the same calm attention you gave to the kneading. After a few moments, you step down from the block and return to the bench, where the oil lamp still burns with a small steady flame. You extinguish it now, pinching the wick between your thumb and forefinger, and a thin trail of smoke rises and curls before dissipating into the air. The bakery is now lit entirely by the grey morning light, and the colours of the room, which was so warm and amber under the lamp, now appear cooler and more muted. The flour sacks are a pale oatmeal hue, the wooden bench a silvery brown, the brick oven a deep, dusty red. The dough under its cloth is a soft, rounded shape, and you can already see that it has begun to swell slightly, the cloth rising in a gentle dome that was not there a few minutes ago. You know that the rise will take perhaps an hour or a little more, depending on the warmth of the room and the vigor of the starter, and during that time you will turn your attention to the oven, building the fire that will bake the bread. But for a short while longer, you allow yourself to stand in the center of the bakery, doing nothing, simply feeling the quiet satisfaction of the completed kneading and the calm anticipation of the work to come. You pour a little more water from the jug into the clay cup and drink it slowly, feeling the cool liquid settle in your stomach. The muscles in your arms and back feel warm and loose, pleasantly tired from the exertion of the kneading, and you stretch your arms overhead once, reaching toward the rafters, feeling the pull along your sides. Then you let your arms fall and stand still again, listening to the sounds of the fort that are now fuller and more varied. The blacksmith's hammer rings steadily, a mule brays from the direction of the stables. The voices of the soldiers are louder now, calling greetings and the small talk of the morning. The smell of wood smoke from the barracks cook fires begins to drift into the bakery, a sharper, more acrid scent than your own clean oak fire, and you know that the camp is fully awake and beginning its day. Your day, too, is well underway, and the dough resting and rising under its cloth holds the quiet promise of the bread that will come. You turn toward the woodpile in the oven, ready to begin the next chapter of the morning's work, your movements slow and unhurried, your mind as calm as the pale, still sky. With the dough resting under its clean linen cloth and the first long rise beginning, you turn now to the oven, the true heart of the bakery, the great domed structure that has stood in this corner for longer than anyone at the fort can remember. The oven is a massive thing, built of fire brick and clay, its rounded dome rising nearly to the rafters and its stone base sunk deep into the earthen floor. The bricks are dark with age and soot, their surfaces pitted and glazed in places where countless fires have licked and cooled, and the whole structure radiates a quiet sense of permanence, as if it were less a piece of equipment and more a part of the earth itself. You walk toward it slowly, feeling the cool flagstones under your sandals give way to the warmer stones directly before the iron door, and you pause there, placing your palm flat against the door's surface. The metal is warm, not hot, the residual heat from the banked embers still pulsing gently through the iron, and you let your hand rest there for a moment, sensing the latent life of the fire that has not fully died. The door is a simple rectangle of blackened iron, set into the brick arch with sturdy hinges and a heavy latch, and it fits snugly, keeping the warmth sealed inside through the night. You release the latch with a firm pull, and the door swings open on its hinges with a low, resonant creak that echoes softly in the small bakery. A wave of warm air washes out, dry and smelling of old wood smoke and hot clay, and you step back slightly to let it pass over you, feeling it on your face and arms like the breath of a sleeping animal. The interior of the oven is a broad, dome-topped chamber, its floor a flat disk of fire brick that has been worn smooth by years of sliding loaves and scraping embers. In the center of the floor lies a soft, grey-white mound of ash, the remains of last night's oak fire covering the few embers that still glow faintly beneath, their orange hearts pulsing dimly like distant stars. The ash is fine and feather-light, and it shimmers slightly as the incoming air stirs it, tiny particles lifting and settling again. The sight of this quiet, smouldering bed is deeply familiar, a daily threshold between the previous night and the new day, and you stand looking at it for a long, calm moment before you begin your work. You walk to the corner of the bakery, where your long-handled bronze rake hangs from a wooden peg, its handle a smooth pole of ash wood darkened by sweat and soot. The rake head is a flat, curved piece of bronze, shaped like a shallow scoop with a straight front edge, and it is cool to the touch, the metal having absorbed the night chill. You carry the rake back to the oven and, holding the long handle with both hands, you insert the bronze head gently into the mound of ash. The motion is slow and careful because you do not wish to stir up a cloud of fine dust that would settle on every surface of the bakery. You draw the rake toward you, pulling a portion of the cool top ash into a small pile just inside the oven door, and then you repeat the motion, working your way deeper into the bed, each stroke uncovering more of the underlying embers. The embers flare faintly as the air reaches them, their orange color brightening for a second before dimming again, and you continue raking with a patient, rhythmic motion, the bronze head scraping softly against the fire brick with a sound like a knife being sharpened on a fine stone. The ash piles up in the doorway, a soft, weightless mountain of grey powder, speckled with tiny black bits of charcoal, and the warmth of the oven increases as you expose the ember bed, heating your face and forearms to a pleasant, toasty glow. When you have raked the entire hearth clean, you set the rake aside, leaning it against the wall within easy reach, and you pick up the metal ash bucket that sits beside the oven. The bucket is a simple cylinder of beaten iron, blackened and slightly dented, with a wire handle that rattles loosely when you lift it. You set the bucket directly in front of the open oven door, and using a small bronze hand shovel, you begin to transfer the ash from the oven floor into the bucket. The shovel slides under the ash with a soft, dry hiss, and you lift each small load carefully, tipping it gently into the bucket to minimize the dust. The ash is so fine that it pours almost like water, and it settles in the bucket in soft grey folds that resemble the surface of a quiet lake. The few glowing embers that you inadvertently scoop up wink out quickly in the cooler air of the bucket, their red fading to black in seconds, and you work your way through the entire pile until the oven hearth is clear and the bucket is nearly full. You brush the last traces of ash from the oven floor with a short-handled whisk made of bound twigs, sweeping the fine remnants forward into the bucket, and then you stand up straight, your lower back making a small quiet pop that is not painful, merely the sound of a body shifting after bending. You lift the ash bucket by its handle, feeling the weight of the fine, cool powder, and you carry it out of the bakery, through the narrow corridor, past the kitchen garden, and out into the small rear yard behind the cookhouse. The yard is a humble, functional space, bordered by the back wall of the barracks, and a low stone wall that separates it from the open ground beyond. The grass here is sparse and cropped short by the kitchen mule, and it is still wet with the heavy dew of early morning, the droplets clinging to each blade and shimmering in the grey light. The air outside is cool and fresh, smelling of damp earth and the faint green perfume of the wild herbs that grow in the cracks of the wall, and you breathe it in deeply as you walk, a pleasant contrast to the dry, ashy air of the bakery. Your sandals leave dark prints in the dewy grass, each step pressing the moisture from the blades, and the prints form a dotted line that leads to the ash pit at the far corner of the yard. The ash pit is a simple hole in the ground, lined with stones and covered by a wooden board to keep out the rain, and you lift the board with your free hand, revealing the grey mound of accumulated ash from many days. You tip the bucket gently, pouring the ash onto the pile in a slow, controlled stream, and the fine powder settles with a soft, papery sound, merging with the older ash until no distinction remains. You knock the bucket lightly against the stone lining to dislodge any clinging dust, then replace the wooden cover and walk back toward the bakery, the bucket swinging empty and light at your side, your sandals now thoroughly wet from the grass. Back inside the bakery, you set the empty bucket in its place beside the oven and pause to wash your hands in a small basin on the bench. The water is cool and slightly cloudy from earlier use, and you splash it over your fingers, rubbing away the fine ash that has settled into the creases of your knuckles. You dry your hands on the cloth, then turn your attention to the woodpile that is stacked under the narrow eave just outside the bakery's side door. This door is a small secondary entrance that opens directly onto a roofed passage leading to the main courtyard, and the woodpile is arranged neatly against the wall there, protected from rain by the overhanging tiles. You step outside again, into the roofed passage, and survey the stacked fuel. The wood is seasoned oak, split into logs roughly the length of your forearm and the thickness of your wrist, each piece grey-brown on the outside and pale gold within where the splitting has exposed the inner grain. The logs are stacked in alternating rows, creating a stable interlocking pile that rises to chest height, and beside them lies a smaller stack of kindling dry vine twigs, thin branches of olive pruned from the courtyard tree, and a few bundles of straw bound with twine. The air here is cooler than in the bakery, and it smells pleasantly of dry wood and the faint tannic scent of oak bark. You select a dozen logs from the pile, choosing pieces that are straight and evenly sized, free of knots that might cause them to burn unevenly. You carry them in 2 armfuls back into the bakery, stacking them on the floor beside the oven in a neat, low pile. The logs clump together softly as you set them down, a solid, woody sound that speaks of density and slow-burning heat. Next you gather a generous handful of the vine twigs and a few thin olive branches, selecting the driest, most brittle pieces that will catch a spark easily, and you carry these inside as well, placing them on the bench near the oven. The kindling is twisted and gnarled, the vine twigs curling like small woody snakes, and they are so dry that they snap with a sharp, clean crack when you test them between your fingers. Now you kneel before the open oven and begin to arrange the fire, a task that is as much an art as a routine. First you take 3 of the split oak logs and lay them on the oven floor in a triangle, their ends meeting at the center and their bodies radiating outward like the spokes of a wheel. These will form the base that allows air to circulate beneath the fire. On top of this triangle, you build a loose lattice of smaller logs, crisscrossing them in alternating directions so that each layer is perpendicular to the one below, creating a stable, open structure that resembles a miniature log cabin. The spaces between the logs aren't deliberate, channels for the air to flow and the flame to climb, and you work slowly, adjusting each piece until it sits securely. The wood is cool and rough under your hands, and it releases a faint, dusty scent as you handle it, the smell of a forest long dried and cured. Once the log lattice stands about 3 hands high, you tuck the kindling into the hollow spaces beneath and between the logs. You push the vine twigs deep into the center, where they will be closest to the spark, and you nestle the olive branches around them, their thin, oily wood ready to ignite quickly. A small bundle of dry straw goes into the very center, right at the base of the kindling, its pale, brittle strands fluffed apart slightly to expose the maximum surface area to the coming flame. The arrangement is now complete, a careful balanced structure of fuel waiting only for the spark. You rise from your knees and go to the small niche in the wall where your fire-starting tools are kept. A curved iron striker, a lump of dark flint the size of a walnut, and a small clay pot containing squares of charred linen cloth. You take these items to the oven and kneel again, settling your weight comfortably on the flagstones. You tear off a small piece of the charcloth, a blackened, feather-light scrap that feels almost like burned paper, and you place it directly on top of the straw bundle. Then you position the flint above the charcloth, holding it between your thumb and forefinger, and you take the iron striker in your other hand. The striker is curved to fit the knuckles, and its striking edge is worn bright from countless impacts. You draw a slow breath, and then you strike the flint with a short, glancing blow of the iron. A small shower of orange sparks bursts from the stone, bright and brief, but none land on the charcloth, and you adjust your aim slightly. You strike again, and this time a single spark lands squarely on the blackened fabric, catching instantly and glowing with a tiny intense orange point that spreads slowly across the surface. You drop the striker and flint immediately, cupping your hands around the glowing char cloth, and you lower your face toward it, blowing a long, gentle stream of air across the ember. The ember brightens and the glow intensifies, sending heat into the straw that is pressed against it. And then with a soft, almost inaudible whisper, a tiny flame licks upward from the straw, small and blue at its base, yellow at its tip. The flame grows quickly, feeding on the dry straw, and within seconds it has spread to the vine twigs, which begin to crackle and pop with a sound like distant rain. The olive branches catch next, their oil-rich wood burning with a bright, clean orange flame that illuminates the inside of the oven with a warm, dancing light, and you sit back on your heels watching the fire take hold. The fire grows steadily, the crackle of the kindling deepening into a low, regular roar as the flames begin to lick at the larger oak logs. The wood hisses softly where residual sap pockets vaporize, and the fire shifts and settles as the kindling collapses, creating new channels for the air. The heat pours out of the open oven door in a steady wave, warming your face and chest, and the bakery begins to fill with a clean, sharp scent of burning oak, a smell that is both smoky and sweet, like incense made from forest wood. The smoke rises into the dome of the oven and curls out through the small ventilation hole near the ceiling, a thin grey ribbon that dissipates quickly in the morning air. And the firelight flickers against the brick walls, casting long, wavering shadows that dance slowly across the bench, the trough, and the flour sacks. You remain kneeling for a while longer, simply watching the fire, your hands resting loosely on your thighs, your mind empty of everything except the sight and sound and warmth of the flames. After a few minutes, when the logs have caught fully and are burning with a steady, established flame, you stand up and retrieve the low three-legged stool from its place beside the water jar. You set the stool a comfortable distance from the open oven door, close enough to feel the warmth but far enough to avoid the direct blast, and you sit down, settling your weight onto the worn, dipped seat. The wood of the stool is smooth and cool, and you lean forward slightly, your elbows on your knees, your gaze fixed on the fire. The flames dance and shift, their orange and yellow shapes constantly changing, rising and falling, twisting around the logs, and the heart of the fire is a deep, intense red where the wood glows with a steady, radiant heat. Small blue flames appear occasionally at the base, where the combustion is hottest and most complete, and they flicker and vanish like spirits. The sound of the fire is a complex, layered thing, the low, steady roar of the main burn, the occasional sharp pop of a pocket of sap exploding, the soft hiss of steam escaping from the ends of the logs, and the whisper of ash crumbling from the charred surfaces. All of these sounds blend together into a continuous soothing noise that fills the bakery and seems to press gently against your ears, a sound that is at once energetic and deeply calming. You sit on the stool and feed the fire at regular intervals, adding a new log whenever the existing ones have burned down enough to create space. The addition of a fresh log is a slow, deliberate act. You select a piece from the stack beside you, feeling its weight in its smooth, dry surface, and then you reach forward and place it carefully onto the burning pile, adjusting its position with a gentle nudge of the bronze rake until it sits securely, its end already beginning to smoke and char. The new log catches quickly, its dry oak fibers igniting with a soft whooshing sound, and the fire brightens momentarily before settling back into its steady burn. You repeat this process again and again, your movements as regular and automatic as breathing, and the stack of logs beside you slowly diminishes while the heat inside the oven builds. As you sit there, the bakery around you continues to warm. The dry, dusty heat spreads outward from the oven in slow, invisible waves, filling the room and pushing back the last of the night's chill. The air becomes heavy and warm, and it carries the mingled scents of oak smoke and the faint, yeasty sweetness of the rising dough under its cloth on the trough behind you. The dough is swelling visibly now, the linen cloth doming upward in a gentle, rounded hill that tells you the yeast is working well, and you glance at it occasionally over your shoulder, noting its progress without concern. The walls of the bakery absorb the heat too, the clay plaster and the wooden bench and the flagstones all warming gradually, and the whole room begins to feel like a small sealed world, a pocket of warmth and light separated from the cooler morning outside. The sounds of the fort continue to filter in through the high window and the gaps around the door. The blacksmith's hammer still rings, the soldiers' voices rise and fall in the rhythms of morning drill. A cart rumbles across the courtyard stones. But these sounds are distant and muted, and they do not disturb the quiet, focused atmosphere of the bakery. You let your mind rest in the simple rhythm of feeding the flames. There is nothing to calculate, nothing to measure, no decisions to make. The fire burns, the dough rises, the morning passes in a slow, uninterrupted flow, and you are present in each moment, watching the flames curl around the oak logs, feeling the heat on your skin, breathing the smoky, yeasty air. The fire is a living thing that you tend with quiet attention, and it returns the favor by warming the oven that will soon bake the bread, continuing a cycle as old as the fort itself. The fire continues its steady burn in the oven behind you, a deep, resonant warmth that fills the bakery from floor to rafters, and the dough under its linen cloth has been rising for the better part of an hour. You rise from the stool where you have been sitting, your body moving with the slow, deliberate economy of long habit, and you cross the short distance to the mixing trough. The cloth covering the dough is now domed upward in a gentle, rounded hill, and when you lift one corner of the linen and peer beneath, the sight that greets you is deeply satisfying in its quiet familiarity. The dough has doubled in size, just as it should, transforming from the tight, compact ball you kneaded into a soft, pillowed mass that fills the center of the trough like a living cushion. Its surface is smooth and glossy, stretched taut by the expansion of the yeast, and it is dotted with a fine network of tiny bubbles that have risen to the top and popped, leaving delicate, papery patches. The color has lightened further, now a warm, creamy ivory, and the yeasty fragrance has deepened into a rich, slightly sweet aroma with a pleasant, mild sourness at the back of the nose. A scent that speaks of fermentation and future bread, all tangled together. You press a finger gently into the surface, and the dough yields easily, the indentation remaining deep and slow to fill back, a sign that the gluten is relaxed and the yeast has done its work. The first rising is complete, and the dough is ready for the next stage. You remove the cloth entirely, draping it over the edge of the trough, and you look at the mass of dough with a calm, appraising eye. It shivers slightly as the cooler air touches it, a delicate quiver that runs across the surface like a ripple on still water, and then it settles again, passive and waiting. You dust your hands lightly with a pinch of flour from the bench, rubbing your palms together to prevent sticking, and then you make a fist with your right hand. You press your knuckles firmly into the center of the dough, pushing down through the soft, airy mass until your fist sinks deep into its heart, and the dough collapses around your hand with a soft, long sigh of escaping gas. The sensation is oddly satisfying, the warm, pillowy resistance giving way all at once, and the yeasty, alcoholic breath of the fermentation rises past your face in a gentle puff. You withdraw your fist and repeat the motion in several places, deflating the dough evenly, pressing out the large pockets of carbon dioxide that have built up during the rise, and the mass reduces to a fraction of its former size, becoming dense and flat and ready to be shaped. The gluten relaxes under this treatment, the long protein strands recoiling briefly before settling into a more manageable state, and the dough now feels soft and pliant under your hands, no longer springy and resistant, but cooperative and calm. You dust the workbench with a generous handful of flour, scattering it across the smooth beechwood surface with a wide, sweeping motion of your hand. The flour lands in a thin, even layer, pale against the dark wood, and you spread it with your fingertips until it covers an area large enough to receive the dough. Then you lean into the trough, slide both hands under the deflated mass, and lift it out in one smooth, heavy scoop. The dough drapes over your forearms, warm and slightly sticky, and it feels substantial, a real weight that speaks of the many loaves it will become. You carry it the short distance to the bench and tip it forward, letting it fall onto the floured surface with a soft, muffled thump, and it spreads out slightly, a pale, irregular mound that quivers once and then stills. You dust the top of the dough with a little more flour, patting it gently, and then you take a moment to clean your hands with the cloth, wiping away the clingy residue before you pick up the bronze dough scraper from its place on the bench. The scraper is a simple, elegant tool, a rectangle of bronze with a curved cutting edge on one side and a straight edge on the other, its metal darkened by years of contact with dough and flour, its wooden handle fitted smoothly into your palm. You hold it lightly, feeling the cool weight of the bronze, and you look at the mass of dough before you, mentally dividing it into the portions that will become the day's loaves. The division is a matter of practiced estimation, a skill so ingrained that you no longer think about it in words. You know the weight of a standard legionary ration loaf by feel, by the heft of it in your hand, by the size of the dough piece before it is shaped, but you also keep the balance scale nearby for verification. The scale sits on the bench to your right, a simple instrument of two brass pans suspended from a wooden arm, with a set of flat bronze weights in a small wooden box. You begin by cutting the dough into rough halves with the scraper, pressing the curved edge down through the soft mass in a single, decisive motion that severs it cleanly. Then you halve each half, and then halve again, working with a steady, unhurried rhythm, the scraper sliding through the dough with a soft, wet sound. The dough yields easily, its soft, relaxed texture offering no resistance, and each cut exposes a fresh, pale surface that glistens slightly in the warm light of the bakery. You continue dividing until you have a batch of rough pieces, each one roughly the size of a large apple, and you line them up on the floured bench in a loose, uneven row. There are perhaps 40 pieces from this first division, and you know you will work through them one at a time, weighing and adjusting before moving on to the next batch, because the full 200 loaves require the dough to be shaped in manageable groups. You take the first piece of dough and place it on the balance pan, settling it gently so that it sits squarely. The pan dips under the weight, and you add a small bronze weight to the opposite pan, watching the arm tilt and then slowly level out, indicating the correct mass. This first piece is slightly too heavy, so you pinch off a small knob of dough with your fingers and set it aside, adding it to the next piece in line. The scale settles into perfect balance, the two pans hanging level and still, and you lift the dough from the pan, satisfied that it meets the quartermaster's specification. You set the weight piece on the bench and reach for the next, repeating the process with the same calm, methodical pace. Place the dough on the pan, check the balance, add or subtract a small amount, and then set the weight piece aside. The motions are simple and repetitive, and they create a gentle meditative rhythm that occupies your hands while your mind rests in a state of quiet alertness. The scale's arm rises and falls, the bronze weights clink softly against the pan, and the pile of weighed dough pieces grows steadily on the bench, each one a pale, irregular lump, waiting to be shaped. The dough is cooperative and cool to the touch, and it smells faintly of the starter, a pleasant, living aroma that fills the air around the bench. When you have weighed enough pieces for the first batch, you set the scale aside and turn your full attention to the shaping. You dust the bench with a fresh, light coating of flour, enough to prevent sticking, but not so much that the dough will become dry, and you take the first lump in your hands. The dough is soft and slightly sticky, and you begin to work it by folding the edges underneath, tucking them into the center with your fingertips, and then rotating the piece a quarter turn and repeating the motion. This folding and turning creates surface tension, stretching the outer skin of the dough into a smooth, taut layer that will hold its shape during the final rise. Your hands move with a practiced automatic rhythm, the motions so familiar that you could perform them in complete darkness, and the dough responds by transforming from a rough, shapeless lump into a smooth, round ball that fits neatly in the cup of your palm. The ball is warm and alive, its surface glossy and tight, and you can feel the tiny bubbles of gas still trapped within, giving it a slight, resilient springiness. You roll it gently between your palms to refine its shape, then set it on the bench and reach for the next piece. The shaping continues, one piece after another, in an unhurried, continuous flow. You take each weighed lump, fold the edges under, rotate, fold again, and then roll it into a ball, your hands remembering the exact pressure and motion required. The balls of dough accumulate on the bench in a loose cluster, each one pale and round and nearly identical to its neighbors, and they tremble slightly when you set them down, quivering from the motion before settling into stillness. After you have formed a batch of these round balls, you let them rest for a short while, covering them with a damp linen cloth so that the gluten can relax before the finely flattening. During this brief pause, you wipe your hands on the cloth, take a sip of water from the clay cup, and check the fire in the oven. The oak logs have burned down to a deep, glowing bed of embers, their surfaces shimmering with a powdery white ash, and the heat radiating from the open door is intense and steady. You add another log from the stack, placing it carefully onto the ember bed, and it catches immediately, a fresh flame springing up to dance over its surface. The fire is progressing exactly as it should, and you return to the bench, satisfied. Now you take each rested ball of dough and flatten it gently into an oval disc. You place the ball on the floured bench and press it down with the palm of your hand, using a gentle, even pressure that spreads the dough outward into a flat, rounded shape. Then you rotate the disc and press again, working your way around the circumference until the dough is roughly the width of your palm and the thickness of 2 fingers. The motion is gentle and deliberate because you do not want to deflate the dough entirely. You want to leave some of the yeast's work intact so that the loaves will rise again during proofing. The flattened discs are pale and smooth. Their surface is dusted with a fine layer of flour, and they look like small soft cushions arranged on the wooden bench. You pick each one up and give it a final gentle pat, smoothing out any irregularities, and then you set it aside on the bench, ready for the proofing boards. The proofing boards are long rectangular planks of smooth cypress wood. Their surface is worn to a silky polish by years of use. You keep them stacked against the wall near the oven, and you now lift 2 of them onto the bench, laying them flat and dusting them liberally with semolina flour. The semolina is a coarse golden yellow flour made from durum wheat, and it has a slightly gritty texture that prevents the dough from sticking to the boards during the final rise. You scatter it in a thin, even layer, using your fingers to spread it evenly across the wood, and the tiny grains glint in the warm light like fine sand. Then you begin to transfer the shaped loaves from the bench to the boards, picking up each oval disc carefully, cradling it in your palm, and setting it down on the semolina-dusted surface with a precise, gentle placement. The loaves sit in neat rows, each one separated from its neighbors by a finger's width. And as you work, the rows grow longer and more orderly, the pale ovals of dough standing out against the golden yellow semolina. The process is slow and methodical, your eyes moving from the bench to the board and back again, your hands never rushing, never fumbling, and the quiet, rhythmic nature of the work is deeply soothing, a balm for the mind. When the first 2 boards are full, you carry them carefully to the long wooden rack that stands against the wall near the oven, where the warmth from the fire will encourage a steady, even proof. You slide the boards into the rack, one above the other, and then you return to the bench to begin the next batch. The entire cycle repeats, dividing the remaining dough into rough pieces, weighing each one on the scale, folding and rolling them into balls, letting them rest briefly, flattening them into oval discs, and arranging them on freshly dusted proofing boards. The pile of dough on the bench slowly diminishes as the rack fills with boards, and the bakery around you remains warm and still. The only sounds the soft, wet squelch of the dough, the gentle scrape of the scraper, the quiet clink of the scale, and the steady, low roar of the oven fire. The scent of the dough, that rich, yeasty, slightly sour perfume, mingles with the wood smoke and the dry heat, creating an atmosphere that is both invigorating and deeply calming, and you work within it like a fish in water, entirely at home. As you shape the final batch, you glance over your shoulder at the proofing rack. The boards are now filled with rows of pale oval loaves, 200 pieces of future bread arranged in neat, orderly lines, their surfaces dusted with flour and semolina, their edges just beginning to swell as the yeast resumes its work. They look, in the warm, dim light of the bakery, like a small, clay-colored army at rest, each loaf a tiny, perfect soldier waiting for the oven's heat. You set the last shaped disc onto the final board, dusting it with a final pinch of semolina, and then you stand back and wipe your hands on the cloth, surveying your work with a quiet, private sense of completion. The shaping has taken the better part of an hour, your hands moving through the motions with the steady, unthinking precision of a craft learned over a lifetime, and the result is spread before you in orderly rows. a silent testament to patience and repetition. Now you cover each board with a clean, dry linen cloth, draping the fabric gently over the loaves so that it rests lightly on their surfaces without pressing down. The cloth will protect the dough from the air, preventing a dry skin from forming, and it will also trap the warmth and moisture that the yeast needs to raise the loaves one final time. You tuck the edges of the cloths loosely under the boards, ensuring they will not slip, and then you step back again, letting the loaves rest in peace. Already you can see the cloths beginning to lift slightly in places where the dough is expanding, the first small signs of the second rise, and you know that within the hour the loaves will have swelled noticeably, their surfaces developing a fine network of tiny cracks where the gluten stretches to accommodate the growing bubbles within. The bakery is quiet now. The bench cleared and wiped down, the tools return to their places, and you take a moment to stand still in the center of the room, breathing slowly, feeling the warmth of the oven on your skin, and the quiet satisfaction of a task fully and peacefully completed. The fire has been burning for a full hour now, perhaps a little more, and the heat inside the oven has built to a deep, steady intensity that you can feel even from several paces away. The logs you fed so carefully have burned down completely into a bed of glowing embers, their shapes still discernible, but softened and blurred by a coating of pale grey ash. The embers pulse with a slow, rhythmic orange light, brightening and dimming as the air currents shift, and the bricks of the dome and the hearth glow a deep, steady red, the color of a sunset held in stone. The warmth that radiates from the open iron door washes over you in a continuous, gentle wave, and the air in the bakery is now thoroughly dry and hot, scented with the clean, sharp perfume of oak smoke and the faint, baked clay smell of the oven's ancient walls. It is time to clear the oven for the bread. You rise from the stool where you have been sitting and approach the oven with the same measured, unhurried steps that have carried you through every task of the morning. You first take up the long-handled bronze rake from its resting place against the wall, feeling the smooth, worn wood of the handle slide into your grip, its surface darkened by sweat and soot from countless firings. The rake head, a flat, curved blade of bronze, is still cool at the edges where it rested away from the direct heat, and you test its balance for a moment, hefting it in both hands as a soldier might heft a familiar spear. Then you step close to the open oven door, close enough that the heat presses against your face and makes the skin at your cheeks tighten, and you look inside at the arrangement of embers that must now be drawn out. The bed of coals is deep and even, covering the hearth from edge to edge, and the glow is so bright that it hurts to look directly at it for more than a few seconds. You squint slightly and begin. You insert the bronze rake into the oven, sliding its flat blade beneath the first layer of ash and embers with a slow, careful motion. The metal warms immediately, the heat traveling up the shaft into the wooden handle, and you feel it as a distant, muted warmth in your palms. You draw the rake toward you in a smooth, gentle pull, and a portion of the glowing coals comes along, tumbling softly over themselves, their orange surfaces flaring briefly as they meet the moving air. You guide this first load of embers to the right side of the oven floor, piling them against the curved wall of the dome, and then you withdraw the rake and go back for more. The process is slow and careful because you do not want to scatter burning embers onto the flagstones or stir up clouds of fine ash that would coat the waiting loaves. Each pull of the rake gathers a manageable load, a mix of blowing coals and grey ash, and tiny blackened bits of charcoal, and you carry it to the growing pile on the right side, building a neat, compact mound that glows with a concentrated, intense heat. The embers hiss and crackle softly as they are disturbed, and small sparks rise up from the pile and vanish into the darkness of the dome, winking out one by one like tiny falling stars. You work your way across the entire hearth, drawing the embers from the left, the center, and the back, always pulling toward the right side where the pile is steadily growing. Your movements are rhythmic and careful, the rake head scraping gently against the fire brick with a low, gritty sound, and the heat on your face and arms is a constant, pressing presence that you accept without complaint. The pile of embers on the right side becomes a concentrated mound of orange and red, its heart almost white with heat, and you leave it there for now, knowing you will scoop it out into the ash bucket once the hearth is fully cleared of smaller debris. After several minutes of this raking, the oven floor is mostly free of the large embers, but a thin, scattered layer of ash and small charcoal fragments remains, coating the bricks like a fine grey dust. This residue must be swept away before the loaves can be loaded, and you set the rake aside, leaning it against the wall, and turn to the next tool of the task. Beside the oven, in a clay pot filled with water, stands the laurel broom. This is a simple device of your own making, a bundle of fresh green laurel branches tied tightly with a leather thong to the end of a long wooden pole. The leaves are broad and dark green, glossy on one side and matte on the other, and they release a clean, sharp, almost medicinal fragrance when crushed or heated. You keep the broom soaking in water so that the leaves remain supple and damp, and when you lift it from the pot now, water drips from the tips of the branches in a slow, irregular patter, dark spots appearing on the flagstones. The pole is cool and smooth in your hands, and you carry the broom to the oven, holding it at a slight angle so that the excess water drains back toward the leaves. You position yourself directly before the open door, the heat now a solid, invisible wall that you lean into, and you begin to sweep the hearth clean. You insert the laurel broom into the oven, pressing the damp bundle of leaves against the hot fire brick at the back of the hearth, and you draw it toward you in a long, steady arc. The moment the wet leaves touch the hot bricks, a sharp hiss fills the air, and the cloud of steam billows up, white and fragrant, carrying the clean, green scent of the laurel mixed with the dry, smoky smell of the oven. The steam condenses on your face in a fine, warm mist, and you blink once or twice, then continue the motion, pulling the broom all the way to the front of the hearth. The damp leaves pick up the fine ash and the tiny charcoal fragments, trapping them in their wet surfaces, and the bricks behind the broom's path emerge a clean, dark red, free of any residue. You lift the broom out, shake the ash from the leaves with a quick flick of your wrist outside the oven door, and then insert it again, starting a new arc beside the one you just completed. The process is methodical and slow, an overlapping series of long, sweeping strokes that cover every inch of the oven floor. The left side, the center, the right side, the back corners where the dome meets the hearth, all are swept with the same unhurried care. The laurel leaves hiss and steam with each pass, and the bakery fills with the sharp, clean fragrance of the crushed leaves, a scent that cuts through the smokiness and leaves a freshness in its wake, like the smell of a forest after a light rain. The steam rises in soft, curling ribbons, catching the amber light from the glowing ember pile, and the oven's own radiant heat, and for a few moments the entire oven mouth is veiled in a gentle white mist that slowly clears as you work. You continue sweeping, moving the broom in long, overlapping arcs, and you pay particular attention to the edges of the hearth where the bricks meet the dome. Ash tends to accumulate in these corners, fine grey drifts that hide from the rake, and you work the damp leaves into the crevices, twisting the pole slightly to angle the bundle, dislodging the hidden dust and drawing it out. The broom leaves a trail of clean, gleaming brick behind it, and the contrast between the swept and unswept areas is striking. The unswept bricks are dull and grey-dusted, while the swept ones are a deep, even red, their surfaces shimmering with the intense heat that now radiates unobstructed. You pause once to dip the broom back into the water pot, swishing the leaves around to rinse away the accumulated ash, and the water darkens slightly with the grey residue. Then you shake off the excess moisture and resume the sweeping, your strokes growing longer and slower as you cover the last remaining sections of the hearth. The work is quiet except for the rhythmic hiss of the steam and the soft scrape of the wet leaves on the brick, and you find yourself breathing in time with the motion, a slow, measured inhale and exhale that matches the sweep of the broom. The world outside the bakery, the waking fort with its drills and its voices and its ringing hammer, seems very far away now, separated by a wall of heat and concentration. When the entire hearth has been swept, you withdraw the broom and inspect the oven floor one final time. The bricks glow a clean, uniform red, their surfaces smooth and unblemished, and the heat rising from them is so intense that it shimmers in the air, creating a wavering, invisible dance above the hearth. No speck of ash remains, no fragment of charcoal, nothing but the pure, even heat that will bake the loaves. You set the laurel broom aside, leaning it against the wall, and you take a moment to wipe your forehead with the back of your wrist. The sweat on your skin is warm and slightly salty, and you blink a few times in the dry, hot air, feeling the pleasant tiredness in your arms from the long, sweeping motion. The fire-brick hearth before you is now a perfect, empty canvas, a broad disk of concentrated warmth waiting to receive the bread, and the sight of it fills you with a quiet, professional satisfaction that requires no words. Before you can load the loaves, you must test the temperature, because the heat of the hearth is the single most important factor in the baking. Too hot, and the bottoms of the loaves will scorch and blacken before the insides are fully cooked. Too cool, and the bread will spread and dry out without developing a proper crust. The old bakers taught you a simple method for judging the heat, a method that requires nothing more than a pinch of flour and a calm, steady count. You walk to the bench and take a small amount of the mixed spelt and barley flour between your thumb and forefinger, just a whisper of powder, and you carry it back to the open oven door. You extend your hand into the oven, feeling the fierce, rising heat wrap around your fingers, and you release the pinch of flour directly onto the clean hearth. The flour lands in a tiny, pale scatter on the glowing brick, and you begin to count silently. 1, 2, 3, 4. For the first few seconds, nothing visible happens, the flour simply sitting there on the hot surface, but as you reach the count of 5, a subtle change begins. The pale flour starts to darken at the edges, a faint golden hue that spreads inward like the slow bloom of a flower. By the count of 8, the flour is a uniform warm brown, the color of toasted nuts, and a faint, pleasant smell of toasted grain rises from it. You reach the count of 10, and the flour has browned gently, without blackening, without smoking, without burning. This tells you as clearly as any instrument could that the oven temperature is exactly right, hot enough to form a crisp crust and set the loaves quickly, yet moderate enough to bake the dense interior through without scorching. You withdraw your hand to brush the pinch of browned flour from the hearth with a quick sweep of the whisk, and the tiny toasted particles scatter and vanish into the ember pile on the side. The hearth is ready, and so are you. Now you turn your attention to the pile of glowing embers that you raked to the right side of the oven. These embers are still intensely hot, their surfaces shimmering with white ash over a deep, pulsating orange, and they must be removed completely before the bread can be loaded. You take up the long-handled bronze rake again, and you also bring the iron ash bucket close to the oven door, setting it on the flagstones directly in front of you. Then, using the rake as a scoop, you begin to transfer the embers from the oven into the bucket. The rake blade slides under the pile with a soft, gritty sound, and you lift a portion of the glowing coals, carrying them carefully to the bucket and tilting the rake so that they slide off into the metal container with a series of soft, tinkling thuds. Each load of embers flares briefly as it meets the air, and the bucket gradually fills with a bed of glowing coals that radiate a fierce, shimmering heat. You work through the entire pile, lifting and carrying and tipping, until the right side of the hearth is as clean and bare as the rest, and the bucket is nearly full of the pulsing orange coals. The iron bucket grows warm, then hot, and you handle it only by the wire handle, carrying it carefully to the corner of the bakery where you keep the large ash pit for hot waste. You pour the embers into the pit, where they will slowly burn themselves out over the course of the day, and then you return the empty bucket to its place beside the oven, its sides still radiating a gentle fading warmth. The oven now stands completely cleared, its domed interior a vast silent space of deep red brick and shimmering, invisible heat. The iron door remains open, and the amber light from the oven spills out into the bakery, painting your face and the front of your linen tunic in warm golden tones. You stand before the open door for a long, quiet moment, feeling the heat on your skin, watching the shimmer of the air above the hearth, listening to the soft, almost inaudible hum of the oven's mass holding its temperature. The bakery feels, in this moment, like a small world sealed off from everything else, a warm, enclosed space dedicated entirely to the task at hand. The sounds of the fort outside, the voices and the hammer and the cart wheels, are so muted and distant that they might be happening in another country entirely. Inside the bakery there is only the oven, the waiting proofing boards, with their rows of pale swelling loaves, the tools hanging in their places, and you, standing quietly in the center of it all, your mind as calm and clear as the swept hearth before you. The moment stretches on, unhurried and complete, and you let it hold you in its warm amber stillness for as long as it wishes, before you finally turn toward the proofing rack, ready to begin the loading of the loaves. The loaves have been proofing under their linen cloths on the rack near the oven, and now, when you lift the corner of the first cloth and peer beneath, the sight tells you they are fully ready for the heat. Each oval disc has swollen noticeably during the final rise, the dough expanding outward and upward into a soft, pillowed shape that is no longer flat but gently domed, with a plump, rounded contour that speaks of active yeast and well-developed gluten. The surfaces of the loaves are pale and smooth, dusted with a golden semolina that now clings in a fine, even coating, and here and there you can see the delicate hairline cracks that have formed where the stretched gluten could no longer contain the expanding gases. These cracks are tiny and irregular, branching like the veins of a leaf, and they expose a slightly darker, creamier dough beneath, creating a subtle textured pattern that will bake into a lovely crust. The loaves have risen to about twice their original height, and they feel soft and airy when you touch one very gently with the tip of your finger, the dough yielding and then springing back slowly, leaving a faint indentation. The proofing is complete, and the time has come to load the oven. You remove the linen cloths from the proofing boards one by one, folding them loosely and setting them aside on the bench, where they will be used later for cleaning or for covering the next day's dough. The boards now stand uncovered, their rows of pale loaves shimmering slightly in the warm amber light that pours from the open oven door. You take a moment to study the arrangement, counting the loaves under your breath in a low murmur, confirming that all 200 are present and accounted for, each one a small individual entity that you have shaped with your own hands. The bakery is very warm now, the air thick with the dry radiating heat of the cleared oven and the lingering scent of laurel and wood smoke, and you feel the familiar, pleasant prickle of sweat on your forehead and the back of your neck. You wipe your face with the cloth that hangs at your waist, then turn to the most important tool of the loading, the wooden peel. The peel hangs on 2 iron hooks set into the wall beside the oven, a long flat paddle of smooth cypress wood with a broad rounded blade and a handle that extends nearly the length of your arm. The wood is pale and silky, worn to a glossy polish by years of sliding under raw dough and lifting finished loaves, and it is lightweight enough to maneuver easily, yet sturdy enough to carry the heavy risen dough without bending. You lift the peel from its hooks and carry it to the bench, where you dust the blade generously with flour from the small bin, using your hand to scatter the fine powder in a thin, even layer. The flour will prevent the dough from sticking to the wood as you slide it into the oven, and you work it into the surface with a quick circular rub of your palm, ensuring that no bare patch remains. Then you test the peel's balance, hefting it in your right hand, feeling the familiar weight and the way the handle fits perfectly into your grip, the wood warm and smooth against your skin. You are ready. You approach the first proofing board, which holds a neat row of 12 loaves, and you position yourself so that the board is directly in front of you, and the open oven door is to your left. The heat from the oven radiates against your side, a steady, intense presence, and you adjust your stance slightly, planting your feet firmly on the flagstones. You select the first loaf, the one at the near end of the row, and you slide the peel blade beneath it with a single smooth motion, working the thin edge of the wood under the soft dough with the care of a mother lifting a sleeping child. The loaf settles onto the peel, its plump oval form resting in the center of the floured blade, and you lift the peel slightly, cradling the dough as you turn toward the oven. The loaf trembles a little from the movement, a tiny, delicate quiver that runs across its surface and then settles, and you carry it the short distance to the open door, holding the peel level and steady. The blast of heat that meets you at the threshold is intense and enveloping, and you squint slightly against it as you extend the peel into the oven, positioning the loaf over the clean glowing hearth. With a practiced flick of your wrist, you jerk the peel backward sharply, leaving the loaf behind on the hot fire brick. The dough sizzles softly as it meets the heat, a gentle wet sound that is part hiss and part sigh, and the bottom of the loaf immediately begins to set, the pale dough turning a slightly darker cream where it touches the brick. You withdraw the peel, and the loaf now sits alone on the vast hot floor, the first of many, its edges already starting to firm. You return to the proofing board for the next loaf, and the process repeats with the same calm, careful rhythm. Slide the peel under the dough, lift, carry, extend, flick, withdraw. Each loaf is placed with a deliberate, precise motion, and you arrange them in a neat row along the back of the oven, spacing them a finger's width apart to allow for the expansion that will come during baking. The loaves sit in orderly alignment, pale ovals against the dark red brick, and you can see the first one you placed beginning to change, its surface developing a subtle, glossy sheen as the heat draws moisture to the surface. The sizzle that accompanied the loading of the first loaf fades into a soft, steady whisper that continues as each new loaf meets the heat, a quiet, continuous sound that is almost like rain falling on a distant roof, and the air inside the oven begins to carry the first faint notes of baking bread. It is still a subtle scent, barely there, a hint of warm grain and toasting flour that underlies the sharper smell of the hot brick and the residual laurel, but it is unmistakable, and you breathe it in with a quiet, private pleasure as you work. You load the loaves from the first proofing board, then move to the second, and then the third, working your way through the rack with the same unhurried, methodical pace that has governed every task of the morning. The peel slides under each loaf with a soft, whispering sound, the floured wood separating cleanly from the semolina dusted dough, and you lift and carry and place each one as if it were the only loaf that mattered. The oven floor gradually fills, the rows of pale dough spreading from the back toward the front, and you adjust the spacing as you go, ensuring that the loaves are evenly distributed across the entire hearth. The heat that pours from the open door is now tinged with a growing golden fragrance, the yeasty, slightly sour note of the starter mixing with the deepening aroma of the baking flour, and the combination is so familiar and so comforting that it wraps around you like a blanket. Your movements are slow and steady, your breathing even, and the sweat that gathers on your forehead runs in tiny, slow rivulets that you wipe away with the back of your hand without breaking the rhythm. As the oven fills, the first loaded loaves, those at the back, have begun to bake in earnest. Their surfaces have dried and firmed, losing the glossy raw look and taking on a soft, matte finish, and the color has shifted from pale cream to a light golden beige. The sizzle has stopped for those loaves, replaced by a faint crackling sound, the sound of the crust forming and hardening as the heat drives the moisture from the surface inward. Tiny bubbles of steam escape from the cracks you made during shaping, and these cracks open slightly, creating small, irregular fissures that will become the decorative scoring of the finished bread. The smell is now rich and round, a deep, warm scent that has layers, the nuttiness of the wholemeal spelt, the earthy barley, the faint tang of the sourdough, and the sweet, toasty caramel of the browning crust. It is a smell that announces itself quietly but insistently, filling the bakery and spilling out into the corridor and the kitchen garden, a silent proclamation that bread is baking and all is well. You continue loading, your concentration narrowing to the simple, repetitive actions of the task. The pile of unloaded loaves on the proofing boards gradually shrinks, while the oven floor becomes a dense, orderly mosaic of baking bread. You have to reach farther into the oven for the later loaves, the heat pressing more intensely against your arm and face, and you work with a slight lean, your body angling to minimize the exposure, while still maintaining the precision of your movements. The peel slides in and out, each cycle taking only a few heartbeats, and the soft, rhythmic nature of the work settles your mind into a state of deep, calm focus. You are aware of nothing else, not the distant hammer, not the voices of the soldiers, not the passing of time, only the bread and the heat and the steady motion of your hands. When the final loaf has been slid from the last proofing board onto the oven hearth, you stand back and let out a long, slow breath that you did not realize you had been holding. The oven is fully loaded, 200 loaves arranged in neat, concentric arcs that cover the entire hearth, each one separated from its neighbors by the width of the finger, each one glowing with the first blush of golden color. The sight is beautiful, in a quiet, humble way, a field of small rounded forms that shimmer in the intense heat, and you take a moment to simply look at it, the peel resting loosely in your hand. The sound of the baking bread is a low, continuous chorus of soft crackles and faint hisses, a sound that is almost musical in its gentle complexity, and the aroma is now so rich and full that it seems to coat the inside of your nose and the back of your throat with its warm, toasty sweetness. You know that the soldiers in the barracks will already be smelling it, their mouths watering as they finish their morning drills, and the thought brings a small, quiet satisfaction that you do not need to express. Now you set the peel aside, leaning it against the wall where it will be within easy reach for the unloading, and you turn your attention to the oven door. You grasp the iron handle with a thick cloth to protect your hand, and you swing the door closed with a gentle, controlled motion, the heavy iron settling into its frame with a soft, solid clunk. You leave the small ventilation hole at the top of the door open, just a crack, so that the steam can escape and the crust will develop properly, and you adjust the opening with a slight nudge of your finger until it is just right. The baking is now a sealed, private process hidden behind the iron door, and the only evidence of what is happening inside is the steady, radiant heat that continues to pour from the oven and the intensifying aroma that fills every corner of the bakery. You step back from the oven, your body relaxing slightly, and you walk to the stool that sits a few paces away, lowering yourself onto its worn seat with a grateful sigh. The stool creaks softly under your weight, a tiny wooden sound, and you settle into a comfortable position, your hands resting loosely on your thighs, your gaze fixed on the closed iron door. You sit and you listen. The sounds from inside the oven are muffled now, reduced to a low, steady hum that seems to vibrate through the brick and into the floor beneath your feet. Occasionally there is a slightly louder pop or crackle, the sound of a small pocket of steam escaping or a dusting of flour igniting briefly on the hot brick, but these are rare and fleeting. The main impression is one of deep, steady quiet, a quiet that is active rather than empty, because it is filled with the silent, invisible work of heat and starch and protein transforming into something new. The aroma continues to deepen, growing more complex as the minutes pass, and you find yourself following its evolution with your eyes half closed, your mind drifting on the warm, fragrant air. At first the scent was primarily of raw grain and yeast, but now those notes have mellowed and been joined by a sweeter, richer smell, the smell of the crust caramelizing and the interior crumb steaming gently inside its firming shell. The air in the bakery is so thick with this scent that it seems to have a texture, a soft, weightless presence that fills your lungs with every breath, and it is a presence that is utterly, profoundly calming. Outside the bakery, the morning has fully arrived, and the sounds of the fort are now louder and more distinct, but they do not intrude on your quiet vigil. You hear the blacksmith's hammer still ringing in its steady rhythm, the clang of iron on iron, and now the added sound of a file being drawn across metal, a high, singing note that rises and falls. The soldiers in the courtyard are calling to one another, their voices muffled but clear, and you catch fragments of their words, orders being given, jokes being exchanged, the ordinary daily language of military life. A cart passes by the bakery door, its wooden wheels rumbling over the flagstones, and the driver calls out to someone, his voice fading as he moves on. These sounds are distant and unimportant, a gentle background murmur that only serves to emphasize the deep, warm silence of the bakery itself. You sit within your small, fragrant world, the stool comfortable beneath you, the heat of the oven a steady, reassuring presence at your side, and you let your thoughts drift without direction, as formless and gentle as the steam that rises from the baking bread. From time to time you rise from the stool and approach the oven, bending to peer through the small ventilation opening. The loaves inside are visible as a dim golden mass, their shapes blurred by the shimmering heat, and you can see that they are rising beautifully, their tops domed and their cracks opening wide to reveal the softer crumb beneath. The color is deepening steadily from pale gold to a rich, warm brown, the shade of autumn leaves or toasted hazelnuts, and the crust is taking on a slight sheen, a thin, glossy layer of dextrinized starch that will give the bread its satisfying, crackling texture. You nod once, a small private confirmation that all is proceeding as it should, and then you return to the stool, settling back into your quiet meditation. The morning passes in this way, a slow, peaceful interlude of sitting and listening and breathing, the warm, bready air, and the bakery remains a calm, sealed sanctuary, a place where time moves at its own unhurried pace, measured only by the baking of the loaves. The loaves are baking steadily behind the closed iron door, their crusts deepening through the shades of gold and brown, and you have settled onto the low stool with the comfortable weight of a task well underway. The heat from the oven continues to radiate in slow, gentle waves, and the rich, bready aroma has now saturated the air so completely that you no longer notice it as a separate scent. It has become the very atmosphere of the bakery, as constant and unnoticed as the air itself. Your hands rest loosely on your thighs, the muscles of your arms and back still warm from the long work of shaping and loading, and your breathing is slow and even. For a few minutes you simply sit, allowing the quiet to wrap around you, but soon your eyes drift toward the wooden tallyboard that hangs on the wall near the flour sacks, and you remember the small administrative duties that await you during this baking interval. There is no urgency, no pressing demand, merely the gentle pull of routine, and you rise from the stool with the same slow, deliberate motion that has carried you through every part of the morning. You walk across the bakery to the tallyboard, a simple rectangle of smooth beechwood that hangs from 2 iron nails, its surface marked with faint, overlapping traces of chalk from countless previous days. Beside the board, a small ledge holds a stick of white chalk and a dry cloth for erasing, both of them dusty with fine, pale powder. You take the cloth first and wipe the board clean, the old marks disappearing in soft white smears that gradually fade to nothing, leaving the wood bare and ready. Then you pick up the chalk, feeling its dry, gritty texture between your fingers, and you study the small carved labels at the top of the board that divide it into sections: barracks, officers, infirmary, total. These labels were cut into the wood long ago by some previous baker, the letters now darkened and smoothed by time, and you read them without effort, your eyes moving across the familiar words as you begin the morning's reckoning. The kitchen overseer had visited the bakery late yesterday evening, just as you were banking the embers for the night, and he had given you the day's numbers in his usual quiet, efficient manner. You remember his words clearly: 200 standard loaves for the barracks, an increase from the usual 160 because of the visiting auxiliary detachment. 30 loaves for the officers' mess, made from the fine white flour instead of the mixed spelt and barley, and 10 small loaves for the infirmary, where the wounded and ill soldiers required a softer, lighter bread. The numbers are simple and straightforward, and you write them on the board now with a chalk, forming the numerals in a clear, careful hand. The chalk makes a soft, scratching sound against the wood, a gentle, rhythmic noise that is pleasant to hear, and the white marks stand out bright and clean against the dark grain. You write 200 for the barracks, 30 for the officers, 10 for the infirmary, and then you add them together in your mind, 240 loaves in total. You write this final number at the bottom, the sum as the day's labor, and you step back to look at the board, confirming that all the figures are correct. The numbers are as expected, aligning perfectly with your mental tally, and the satisfaction of this small, precise act settles into you like a stone dropping into still water, sending out quiet, concentric rings of calm. With the tally recorded, you turn your attention to the flour stocks, another small administrative task that you perform every few days. You walk to the back wall where the sacks are arranged, their bulky, rounded forms standing in a neat row, and you begin a slow, careful inventory. The first sack, the one of wholemeal spelt that you opened this morning, is now about half empty, its contents having been sifted and measured for the main dough. You lift the sack by its bottom corners, feeling the weight diminish as the remaining flour shifts, and you estimate that it holds enough for perhaps one more full day of baking. The second sack of spelt is still full, its drawstring tight and unbroken, and you pat its side with your palm, hearing the dense, solid thump of packed flour. The third and fourth sacks are also full, the hemp fabric taut and bulging, and you make a mental note that the spelt supply is adequate for the remainder of the week, assuming no further increase in ration requirements. The barley sacks, 2 of them, are both about 3/4 full, their coarser, greyer flour showing through the weave in tiny dusty puffs when you touch them, and you calculate that they will last at least 6 more days at the current rate of use. The small sack of fine white flour, reserved for the officer's bread, is still nearly full because you use it sparingly, only for the 30 small loaves each day, and you lift it briefly, feeling its lightness, confirming that it will not need replenishment for another fortnight. You cross to the bench where a small wax tablet and a bronze stylus rest in a niche, your simple record-keeping tools. The tablet is a wooden frame filled with a thin layer of dark beeswax, its surface scratched with the faint overlapping marks of previous notes, and the stylus is a slim bronze rod with a pointed end for writing and a flat end for erasing. You sit on the stool by the bench, angling the tablet toward the light from the high window, and you write a brief, simple note in the wax, spelt low in 4 days. Inform quartermaster. The stylus scratches against the wax with a soft, whispery sound, the letters forming as pale, indented lines, and you read a note back to yourself, nodding once in confirmation. This small reminder will prompt you to visit the quartermaster's office later in the day, during the quiet afternoon hours when the fort's administrative business is conducted, and you will tell him in person that the spelt supply requires replenishment by the end of the week. The quartermaster is a calm, efficient man who appreciates advance notice, and your interactions with him are always brief and courteous, a simple exchange of information between two people who understand the quiet importance of keeping the fort supplied. You set the tablet and stylus back in their niche, the small task completed, and you rise from the stool, feeling the pleasant, orderly sense of a world kept in balance. Now you turn to the tools of your trade, those simple, well-worn implements that you handle every day, and that require from time to time a little care and attention. The bakery's bright enough now, the grey morning light from the high window supplemented by the warm amber glow from the oven, and you decide to inspect each tool in turn, looking for any small faults that might need repair. You begin with the wooden peel, which still leans against the wall where you left it after loading the loaves. You lift it in both hands, running your fingers along the smooth, polished blade, feeling the silky texture of the cypress wood. The blade is in good condition, its surface free of splinters or cracks, the flour dusting having protected it from the dough's moisture. Then you slide your hand down the long handle, and as your fingers near the grip, you feel it, a small hairline crack that runs along the wood for about the length of your thumb, a narrow fissure that has developed perhaps from the repeated stress of the flicking motion or from the dry heat of the oven. The crack is not yet deep, not yet a threat to the peel's strength, but you know from experience that such cracks can grow if left unattended, and you decide to repair it now, while the bread bakes and the morning offers a quiet interval. You carry the peel toward the doorway where the light is strongest, the grey morning sun spilling in through the narrow opening and illuminating a small rectangle of flagstone. You sit down on the low doorstep, the stone cool beneath you even through your tunic, and you position the peel across your lap, the cracked handle facing upward. Beside you, on a shelf just inside the door, you keep a small jar of water, a bundle of thin leather strips, and a sharp knife for just such repairs. The leather strips are cut from an old, discarded sandal strap, the leather still supple and strong, and you take one now, tipping it into the water jar and letting it soak until it becomes soft and pliable, the fibers relaxing and expanding. While the strip soaks, you examine the crack more closely, tracing its path with your fingertip, feeling the slight roughness of the split wood. The crack is clean and narrow, running along the grain, and it will respond well to a simple binding, the wet leather shrinking as it dries and pulling the wood tightly together. You take the soaked strip from the water, squeeze the excess moisture from it with a gentle press of your fingers, and then you begin to wind it around the handle, starting just below the crack and working upward in a tight, even spiral. The leather is cool and slippery against the wood, and you pull it taut with each turn, the strip lying flat and smooth, the edges overlapping slightly to form a continuous, unbroken band. You wind slowly and carefully, your fingers working with the same patient precision that you bring to shaping the loaves, and the wet leather makes a soft, whispering sound as it slides over the wood, a sound that is almost musical in its gentle consistency. When you've covered the entire length of the crack and extended the binding a little beyond it on both ends, you cut the remaining strip with the knife, the blade slicing through the leather with a clean, crisp sound, and you tuck the end under the last turn, pulling it tight so that it holds securely. You tie a simple knot, a double loop that will not slip, and then you sit back and examine your work. The binding is neat and tight, the wet leather already beginning to dry and contract, and the crack is now held firmly closed, the handle strengthened and ready for many more days of use. You set the peel aside to dry, leaning it against the wall in a patch of sunlight, and you rise from the doorstep, brushing the dust from your tunic. The next tool that draws your attention is the bronze dough scraper, which rests on the bench among the flour dust and the stray bits of dried dough. You pick it up and hold it to the light, turning it over in your hands, and you notice that the curved cutting edge has developed a slight dullness, a faint rounding that was not there when the scraper was new. The bronze is a soft metal, and it wears gradually with use, losing its keen edge against the wooden bench and the constant contact with the dough. You walk to the small sharpening stone that you keep on a shelf near the oven, a rectangular block of fine grey stone with a slightly gritty surface, and you sit down on the stool beside the bench. You pour a few drops of water from the clay cup onto the stone, watching the liquid spread and darken the grey surface, and then you begin to sharpen the scraper. You hold the blade at a shallow angle against the stone, the bronze making a soft, ringing sound as it slides across the wet grit, and you move the scraper in slow, circular strokes, alternating sides, feeling the metal grow smoother and keener under your hands. The motion is gentle and repetitive, your wrist making small, steady circles, and the sound of the sharpening is a low, continuous whisper that blends with the quiet hum of the baking oven. From time to time you pause to test the edge with your thumb, feeling the sharpness increase, and when the blade is once again keen and bright, you wipe it clean with the cloth and set it back on the bench, its bronze surface gleaming faintly in the warm light. You next inspect the balance scale, the simple instrument that ensures each loaf meets the quartermaster's specification. The scale hangs from a hook on the wall beside the bench, its two brass pans suspended by thin chains, and you lift it down carefully, setting it on the cleared surface of the bench. The chains are all intact, the small links unbroken and shining with a dull golden luster, and the central arm moves freely on its pivot, tilting up and down with a smooth, frictionless ease. To check the scale's accuracy, you take two of the small flat brass weights from the wooden box, each one identical in size and marking, and you place one in each pan. The pans dip slightly, find their equilibrium, and settle into a perfect level balance, the arm horizontal and still. You watch it for a long moment, waiting for any drift, but the scale holds true, the two weights exactly matched, and you are satisfied that the instrument is reliable. You remove the weights, return them to their box, and hang the scale back on its hook, the chains jingling softly as they settle. There are other small tasks, quiet acts of maintenance that fill the time while the bread bakes. You take the bronze scoop and polish it with a clean, dry rag, rubbing the metal until it gleams with a soft, warm glow, the evidence of your care visible in the shining surface. You check the wooden modius bucket for any warping or cracking, running your hand around its smooth interior, and you find it sound and true. You wipe down the workbench with a damp cloth, removing the accumulated flour dust and the tiny dried scraps of dough, and the beechwood surface emerges clean and pale, ready for the next task. You refill the water jug from the large terracotta jar, the water splashing softly, and you take a long, slow drink, the cool liquid a welcome contrast to the dry, hot air of the bakery. Each of these small acts is performed without haste, without any sense of burden, and they occupy your hands while your mind rests in a state of quiet, unhurried contentment. Occasionally, you rise from your work and walk to the oven, bending to peer through the small ventilation opening in the iron door. The loaves inside are visible as a mass of golden-brown forms, their crusts now a deep, rich shade that catches the amber light and glows with a soft, almost luminous warmth. The cracks you cut on the tops have opened wide, the pale, creamy crumb visible within, and the loaves have risen to their full, rounded height, their domes firm and glossy. The aroma that pours through the vent is intense and complex, the nutty spelt and the earthy barley now joined by a sweet, caramelized note that speaks of perfectly baked crust. You can hear the bread still crackling softly, a faint, musical sound that tells you the baking is nearing its end, but is not yet complete, and you stand for a moment, your face warmed by the escaping heat, watching the loaves with the same calm, patient attention that a shepherd gives to a resting flock. Then you straighten up, return to the stool by the bench, and resume your small, quiet tasks, waiting for the moment when the bread will be ready to emerge from the heat, fully transformed and ready for the camp. The first batch of loaves has been baking long enough, and you know this not by any timepiece, but by the deep golden brown color you glimpse through the ventilation opening, and by the rich, fully developed aroma that now fills the bakery like a physical presence. The scent has reached its peak, a complex layered fragrance that combines the nutty sweetness of the spelt, the earthy depth of the barley, the faint pleasant sourness of the starter, and the caramelized, almost buttery note of the well-browned crust. It is a smell that announces completion, and you rise from the stool where you have been sitting, your body feeling loose and rested, and you walk to the oven with the calm, purposeful steps of someone who has done this 1,000 times before. You grasp the thick cloth that hangs on a hook beside the oven, the one you use to protect your hands from the fierce heat, and you wrap it around your right hand, feeling the rough woven texture against your palm. Then you reach for the iron door handle, the cloth insulating your skin from the hot metal, and you pull the door open with a slow, steady motion. The hinges creak softly, a low, familiar sound, and a great wave of heat rolls out of the oven, carrying with it the full, intense fragrance of the finished bread. A fragrance so rich and warm that it seems to wrap around you like a second tunic. You step back for a moment, letting the heat wash over you, and then you lean forward to look inside. The sight that greets you is, as always, deeply satisfying in its quiet, humble beauty. The loaves that you loaded as pale, soft discs of dough have transformed into golden brown ovals. Their crusts a deep, even shade that ranges from amber at the edges to a darker, richer brown on the domed tops. The surfaces are glossy and crackled, covered with a fine network of tiny fissures where the crust has split during the oven spring, and the larger cracks you cut during shaping have opened wide, revealing the pale, creamy crumb within, a crumb that looks light and airy and tender. The loaves have risen to their full height, their shapes plump and rounded, and they sit in neat, orderly rows on the hearth, each one distinct and individual, yet each one part of the greater whole. A faint wisp of steam still rises from a few of them, curling upward into the dome, and the sound of the baking has subsided into a soft, residual crackle, the sound of the crust cooling and contracting ever so slightly in the open air. The hearth itself is still a deep, glowing red, its heat undiminished, and the loaves seem to float on this sea of warmth, golden islands on a crimson ocean. You reach for the wooden peel, which you left leaning against the wall after its repair, and you check the leather binding on the handle with a quick, approving glance. The leather has dried and tightened, the crack held firmly closed, and the peel feels solid and dependable in your grip. You dust the blade with a fresh, light coating of flour, scattering the fine powder with your fingers, and then you extend the peel into the oven, sliding the thin wooden edge carefully beneath the first loaf at the front of the hearth. The peel slips under the bread with a soft grating sound, the flour easing its passage, and you lift the loaf gently, cradling its weight on the broad blade. The loaf is lighter than it was when raw, its moisture driven off by the heat, and it feels firm and crisp on the bottom, the crust making a faint, dry, scratching sound against the wood. You withdraw the peel from the oven, the loaf riding securely on its blade, and you carry it across the bakery to the long wooden cooling rack that stands against the far wall. The rack is a simple structure of beechwood slats, its shelves open to the air to allow the steam to escape, and you slide the loaf off the peel and onto the top shelf with a gentle, practiced motion, the bread landing with a soft, hollow thump. You pause for a moment and tap the bottom of the loaf with your knuckle, listening for the sound it makes. The loaf returns a clear, hollow note, a resonant thwack that tells you the interior is fully baked and the crumb has set properly, and you nod once in quiet confirmation before turning back to the oven for the next loaf. The unloading proceeds with the same calm, methodical rhythm that has governed every task of the morning. You slide the peel under each loaf, lift it carefully, carry it across the bakery, and set it on the cooling rack, your movement steady and unhurried, your breathing even and deep. The loaves come out of the oven one by one, each one a small, perfect world of crust and crumb, and the cooling rack gradually fills with their golden brown forms, arranged in neat, orderly rows. As the loaves cool, their crusts begin to crackle audibly, a soft, musical sound that fills the bakery, the sound of the crust contracting and the crumbs settling, and this crackling is like a quiet conversation among the loaves, a gentle chorus that continues for several minutes after each loaf emerges from the heat. The aroma that rises from the cooling bread is slightly different from the baking smell, softer and sweeter, with a mild yeasty undertone that becomes more pronounced as the steam dissipates. It is the smell of bread that is ready to be eaten, and it mingles with the residual heat of the oven and the cooler air of the bakery to create an atmosphere of deep, comforting completion. You work through the first batch of loaves, the ones at the front of the oven, and then you reach deeper into the hearth for those at the back, leaning forward slightly, the heat pressing more intensely against your face and arms. The peel slides in and out, each cycle taking only a few heartbeats, and the pile of baked loaves on the cooling rack grows steadily higher while the oven floor gradually empties. When the first batch is fully unloaded, you pause to assess the situation, wiping the sweat from your forehead with the cloth at your waist, and you see that the cooling rack is now about 1/3 full, the loaves arranged in neat golden rows, their crackling gradually subsiding into a soft, residual tick. The oven still holds more loaves, the second and third batches that you loaded later, and these are now perfectly baked, their crusts the same deep, even brown, their interiors fully set. You take up the peel again and resume the unloading, your movements as steady and patient as before, and the rhythm of the work settles you into a state of quiet, focused calm. The crackling of the cooling bread, the soft scrape of the peel on the hearth, the hollow thump of each loaf on the rack, the steady, radiant warmth of the open oven, all of these sensations blend together into a single, seamless experience, and you move through it as naturally as a fish moves through water. When the final loaf has been lifted from the hearth and placed on the cooling rack, you stand back and let out a slow, deep breath, your shoulders relaxing, your arms hanging loosely at your sides. The oven is empty now, its hearth a bare red glowing disk, and the iron door still stands open, the heat pouring out in a diminishing wave. The cooling rack, by contrast, is full to capacity, its shelves laden with row upon row of golden brown loaves, their crusts gleaming softly in the warm light, their crackling now reduced to an occasional isolated pop. The sight is one of quiet abundance, the tangible result of all the morning's work, and you allow yourself a moment of simple, wordless satisfaction as you look at the bread you have made. The smell in the bakery is now the pure, clean scent of fresh bread, a smell that seems to contain within it everything good about the simple act of baking, the flour and the water, the salt and the starter, the fire and the thyme, all transformed into something nourishing and true. You set the peel aside, leaning it against the wall, and you close the oven door gently, leaving it slightly ajar so that the remaining heat can dissipate slowly without cracking the bricks. Then you turn to the cooling loaves and begin the next small task, which is to check a few of them for quality. You select a loaf from the middle of the rack, one that is representative of the batch, and you lift it in both hands, feeling its weight. The loaf is substantial but not heavy, its crust firm and crisp under your fingers, and you turn it over, inspecting the bottom. The bottom crust is a uniform golden brown, slightly darker than the top, and it is smooth and even, with no scorched spots or pale underbaked areas. You tap it with your knuckle, and it returns the same clear hollow note you heard before, a sound that speaks of a well-aerated crumb and a complete bake. You set this loaf aside on the bench, a sample for the kitchen overseer to inspect if he wishes, and you continue the unloading of the subsequent batches, if any remain in the oven, or else you prepare for the delivery. The bakery is now fully bright, the grey morning light from the high window having strengthened into the clear, pale light of mid-morning, and the sounds of the fort outside are at their daily peak. You can hear the full rhythmic clangor of the blacksmith's hammer, the shouts of the drill instructor on the parade ground, the rumble of cartwheels and the braying of mules, the low continuous murmur of hundreds of men going about their military duties. These sounds are loud and varied, but they remain distant and muted, filtered through the thick walls of the bakery, and they do not disturb the calm, quiet atmosphere that you carry with you like a personal climate. You walk to the side door of the bakery, the one that opens onto the roofed passage leading to the main courtyard, and you push it open, stepping out into the cool, fresh air. The contrast with the hot, dry interior of the bakery is immediate and bracing, the outside air damp and cool, smelling of stone and earth and the faint green scent of the courtyard herbs. You stand in the doorway for a moment, blinking in the brightness, your skin tingling as the sweat cools on your forehead, and you look out into the courtyard to see if the mule cart has arrived. The courtyard is a broad, open space paved with large irregular flagstones, its center occupied by a stone fountain where a thin stream of water trickles continuously into a shallow basin. Soldiers walk across the yard in small groups or alone, their tunics and sandals dusty from the morning's drills, their voices carrying easily in the open air. To your left, the long, low building of the barracks stretches the length of the courtyard, its doors and windows open to the morning, and to your right stands the cookhouse and the granary, their tile roofs glinting with the last of the overnight dew. And there, approaching from the direction of the stables, you see the mule cart, a simple two-wheeled vehicle pulled by a single patient grey mule and driven by a young legionary helper whose name you know but rarely use. He is a quiet, serious young man from a farming family in the north, and he has been assigned to kitchen duty as part of his training. He drives the cart slowly, the mule walking at a steady, unhurried pace, its hooves clopping softly on the flagstones, and the cart's wheels rumble with a low, continuous sound that you have been hearing in the background of your morning without consciously registering it. The cart pulls up directly in front of the bakery's side door, and the young helper draws the mule to a gentle halt with a soft word and a light tug on the reins. The mule stops obediently and stands perfectly still, its large dark eyes blinking slowly, its long ears swiveling forward and back as it listens to the sounds of the courtyard. The cart bed is lined with clean, bleached linen cloths, ready to receive the loaves, and the helper jumps down from the driver's seat, landing lightly on the flagstones. He greets you with a simple nod, a gesture of respect that requires no words, and you return the nod in the same quiet manner. Together you walk back into the bakery, the young man following a step behind you, and his eyes widen slightly at the sight and smell of the cooling loaves, a reaction you have seen many times from new assistants, a moment of simple, sensory wonder at the abundance of fresh bread. You begin to transfer the loaves from the cooling rack to the cart, working together in an easy, wordless coordination. You take the loaves from the rack, 2 or 3 at a time, cradling them against your chest, and you carry them out to the cart, where you place them carefully on the linen cloths, arranging them in neat, stable stacks. The helper does the same, his movements a little more hesitant and careful, and you watch him out of the corner of your eye, noting his diligence and his gentle handling of the bread. The loaves are still warm, their crusts crackling softly as they are moved, and they fill the cart with their deep, homely scent, a scent that spreads out into the courtyard and draws the attention of passing soldiers who glance toward the cart with expressions of quiet anticipation. The mule stands patiently, flicking its ears occasionally, its breath steaming slightly in the cool air, and it seems utterly indifferent to the treasure of bread being piled behind it. You count the loaves as you load them, your lips moving silently, the numbers ticking over in your mind. 180 of the standard barracks loaves go into the cart, filling it almost to capacity, and you arrange the remaining 20 loaves on a separate, smaller board that the helper will carry by hand to the infirmary later. The 30 fine, white loaves for the officers' mess are already set aside on the bench, and you will deliver those yourself, carrying them on a wooden tray after the cart has departed. The total matches the tally board exactly, and you make a small mark on the board with the chalk, a simple cross beside the word barracks, indicating that the delivery has been made. The helper watches you make the mark, his expression attentive, and then he turns back to the cart, checking that the loaves are secure and that the linen cloths are tucked in around them to protect them from the dust of the courtyard. When the cart is fully loaded, the young helper climbs back onto the driver's seat, taking up the reins with a practiced, easy grip. He looks at you once more, and you give him a small nod, a silent signal that all is in order. He clicks his tongue softly, and the grey mule leans into its harness, the cart creaking as it begins to move, the wheels turning slowly on the flagstones. You stand in the doorway of the bakery and watch the cart trundle away across the courtyard, heading toward the mess hall where the soldiers will soon gather for their midday meal. The loaves shift slightly with the motion, a gentle rocking movement, and the scent of the bread drifts behind the cart like a fragrant banner dissipating slowly in the open air. You watch until the cart turns a corner and disappears from sight, and then you step back into the bakery, closing the side door behind you, returning to the warm, quiet space that still holds the lingering aroma of the baking and the quiet satisfaction of a task fully completed. The delivery is done, and the morning's main work is over. With the mule cart trundled away across the courtyard and the delivery of the barracks loaves complete, the bakery settles into a new kind of quiet, the quiet that comes after the main work is done. The oven door still stands slightly ajar, the last of the intense heat radiating outward in a slow diminishing wave, and the cooling rack is now mostly empty, except for the few loaves you have set aside, the 30 fine white loaves for the officers' mess, and the 10 small soft loaves for the infirmary, which wait on a separate tray. The air in the bakery is still warm and fragrant, filled with the lingering scent of baked bread, a scent that has now mellowed and softened, losing the sharp hot edge of the oven and becoming something rounder and gentler, like the memory of baking rather than the act itself. You stand for a moment in the center of the room, your hands resting loosely at your sides, your body feeling the pleasant, deep tiredness that follows a long morning of steady work, and you let your gaze travel slowly around the familiar space, taking in the flour-dusted bench, the empty mixing trough, the tools hanging in their places, the stack of proofing boards against the wall. Everything is as it should be, and the sight of it fills you with a quiet, unspoken contentment. You decide to complete the remaining deliveries before you begin the cleaning, so that the day's obligations will be fully discharged and the afternoon will stretch before you open and unhurried. You walk to the bench where the tray of fine white loaves sits, the ones made from the soft, sifted wheat flour and shaped slightly smaller than the standard barracks ration. These loaves have a paler, more golden crust, finer and smoother than the rough, hearty spelt and barley bread, and their crumb is lighter and more delicate, the kind of bread that officers prefer with their morning wine and olive oil. You cover the tray with a clean linen cloth, tucking the edges under neatly, and you lift it with both hands, the weight manageable and steady. Then you carry the tray out of the bakery, through the narrow corridor, past the kitchen garden where the rosemary and thyme are now bright and visible in the full morning light, and out into the main cookhouse area. The cookhouse is a larger, busier space than your bakery, filled with the clatter of pots and the voices of the kitchen staff preparing the midday meal. And the air here smells of simmering lentils and roasting meat and the sharp, pungent tang of fermented fish sauce. You pass through this bustle quietly, a calm, unhurried figure carrying a tray of fine bread, and the kitchen workers nod to you as you go, their greetings brief and friendly. You exit the cookhouse through its main door, and walk along the covered portico that leads to the officer's mess, your sandals making a soft, even scuff on the worn stone. The officers' mess is a smaller, more refined building than the common barracks, its walls plastered and painted with simple geometric designs in muted reds and ochres, its doorways wider and its windows fitted with wooden shutters. You enter through the service door at the side, as you always do, and you find the mess orderly arranging plates on a long wooden table. He is an older man, a retired centurion with a weathered face and a quiet, dignified manner, and he looks up as you enter, his expression warming slightly at the sight of the tray. You set the tray on the serving table and remove the cloth, revealing the 30 small, perfect loaves, their crusts gleaming softly in the room's filtered light. The mess orderly nods his approval, making a small mark on his own tally slate, and you exchange a few quiet words about the quality of the flour and the number of officers currently in residence. The conversation is brief and practical, and when it is done, you take your leave, carrying the empty tray back through the portico and across the courtyard toward the infirmary. The infirmary is a long, low building near the fort's main gate, its walls whitewashed and its windows large to admit the healing sunlight. You enter quietly, as you always do here, because the men inside are resting or recovering, and the atmosphere is one of hushed calm. The chief medicus, a Greek with a gentle face and ink-stained fingers, meets you at the door and takes the 10 small soft loaves from your tray, counting them with a quick, practiced glance. These loaves are made from the same fine white flour as the officer's bread, but you have added a little extra water to the dough to make the crumb softer and easier to chew, suitable for men with wounded jaws or weak digestions. The medicus thanks you in his low, accented voice, and you respond with a simple dip of your head, not wishing to disturb the quiet any more than necessary. Then you leave, stepping back out into the bright, full light of the courtyard, the empty tray under your arm, your last delivery complete. Back in the bakery, you set the tray aside on the bench and take a moment to stand still, listening to the silence that has returned to your small domain. The oven has cooled noticeably, its door now only warm to the touch, and the heat in the room is slowly dissipating, replaced by the cooler, fresher air that seeps in through the high window and the gaps around the doors. The morning's intensity has passed, and what remains is the quiet, restorative calm of the afternoon. You pour a cup of water from the jug and drink it slowly, feeling the coolness spread through your chest, and then you roll your shoulders once or twice, loosening the residual tightness, before you turn your attention to the cleaning. Cleaning the bakery is a ritual as old as the baking itself, a series of small methodical tasks that restore order and prepare the space for the next day's work. You begin with the oven because it is the heart of the room and its care is the most important. The embers you raked into the ash bucket earlier have now burned themselves out completely, leaving only a fine grey powder that is cool to the touch. You carry the bucket to the ash pit behind the kitchen and empty it, the fine ash pouring out in a soft, silent stream, adding another layer to the grey mound that has been accumulating for months. Back inside, you take a damp cloth and wipe down the oven's iron door, removing the thin layer of soot that has settled on its surface, and the blackened metal gleams faintly in the light. You rake the remaining ash from the oven hearth, the last fine dust that the laurel broom missed, and you sweep it out with a twig whisk, leaving the bricks as clean and bare as you found them this morning. Then you arrange a small, neat pile of fresh kindling inside the oven, ready for the next firing, and you close the iron door completely, sealing the hearth away until it is needed again. Next you turn to the mixing trough, the great oak vessel that has held the dough through its long, slow rise. The trough is smeared with the dried, crusty remnants of the dough, the pale, floury residue that clings to the wood in thin, papery patches. You take a bowl of warm water from the jug and a stiff-bristled brush made of boar hair, and you begin to scrub the interior of the trough, working in slow, circular motions, the water darkening with the dissolved flour and the faint, yeasty smell of the starter rising from the damp wood. The brush scrapes gently against the oak, its bristles finding the corners and the seams where the dough has lodged, and you rinse the trough with clean water, pouring it from the jug in a steady stream, watching it sheet down the sides and pool at the bottom. You repeat the scrubbing and the rinsing until the water runs clear and the wood is smooth and clean to the touch, its surface a dark, damp brown that will dry to its usual pale grey. Then you wipe the trough dry with a cloth, leaving it spotless and ready for tomorrow. The workbench receives the same careful attention. You scrape away the dried dough scraps with the bronze scraper, the metal edge making a soft ringing sound against the beechwood, and then you scrub the surface with the brush and warm water, removing the flour dust and the sticky residue. The wood emerges pale and smooth, its grain a subtle wavy pattern that catches the light. You dry the bench with a cloth, then wipe down all the tools, the dough scraper, the modius bucket, the leveling stick, the bronze scoop, each one cleaned and dried and returned to its proper place on the hooks or the shelf. The balance scale you wipe gently with a dry cloth, polishing the brass pans until they gleam, and you check the chains once more to ensure they are free of any clinging dough or flour. The wooden peel you wipe clean and lean against the wall in its usual spot, the new letter binding on the handle, a small proud mark of your morning's repair. The proofing boards are next, stacked against the wall near the oven. Each board is dusted with a fine layer of semolina flour, and you carry them outside one by one into the small yard behind the cookhouse, where you shake them out, the golden semolina scattering into the grass in a thin, pale cloud. Then you wipe each board with a damp cloth, removing any remaining residue, and you stack them in the sunshine to dry, the cypress wood warming quickly and releasing a faint, spicy fragrance. The linen cloths that covered the dough and the loaves are gathered up and placed in a woven basket, to be taken to the laundry later, where they will be washed and dried and folded for the next day. The cloths are stiff with dried flour and faintly sour with the smell of the starter, and they will return clean and soft and smelling of sunshine, ready to begin the cycle again. Now you sweep the floor, using the long-handled broom of bound twigs that stands in the corner. You begin at the far wall, near the flour sacks, and you work your way slowly toward the door, the twigs scratching softly against the flagstones, gathering the flour dust and the stray bits of dough and the tiny fragments of ash that have settled during the morning. The dust rises in a fine, pale cloud, dancing in the shafts of light that fall through the high window, and you sweep steadily, your arms moving in long, easy arcs. The debris accumulates in a small grey pile at the center of the floor, a mixture of flour and ash and semolina and the fine sandy grit that always finds its way into a bakery, and you scoop it up with a flat wooden dustpan, carrying it out to the compost heap behind the stable. The compost heap is a broad, dark mound of vegetable peelings and spent grain and ash, steaming gently in the cool air, and you scatter your small offering across its surface, the grey dust settling into the darker material and disappearing. The woodpile under the eaves needs restocking after the morning's fire, and you spend a quiet quarter-hour carrying split oak logs from the main wood store near the stables to your own smaller pile beside the bakery door. The logs are heavy and solid, their bark rough under your hands, and you carry them two at a time, walking back and forth along the roofed passage, your sandals scuffing the familiar path. The main wood store is a large open-sided shed filled with the sweet dry scent of seasoned timber, and the logs there are stacked in great, towering piles that reach nearly to the roof. You select your logs carefully, choosing pieces that are straight and even, and you carry them one load at a time, building your own small stack into a neat, stable pile. The work is mildly strenuous, a gentle warmth returning to your muscles, and when it is done, you brush the bark dust from your tunic and survey the replenished wood pile with a quiet, private satisfaction. The large terracotta water jar in the corner of the bakery is now nearly empty, its level low after the morning's mixing and cleaning, and you take up the wooden yoke that leans against the wall, its two bronze buckets hanging from chains. You carry the yoke to the courtyard fountain, walking slowly, the buckets swinging gently with your steps. The fountain is a simple, unadorned structure, a stone basin fed by a lead pipe that trickles a continuous stream of clear, cold water from the aqueduct that serves the fort. You fill,